Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website ageoftruth.tv. Ja.
Hej Ole.
Hej Lukas.
Hej, godt at se dig.
Det er lige måde. Det er lige måde.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. And this is the morning in Copenhagen. And we now turn to a very old and wonderful dear friend of the show, Ole Dammegaard, joining us from Bali in Indonesia. Good evening, Ole.
Good morning, Lucas.
It's nice to have you here. And first of all, before we go into what we're going to discuss today, I can just tell the audience that, of course, they all know you from being an expert on false flag attacks, and we've done so many shows on very many different topics here, but you're also an expert on very, very fascinating, wild, and extreme murder cases, such as the JFK case, which we all already had on Age of Truth TV, which people can see some years ago, and many of the other big cases like Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and what have you. But this topic we're going to talk about today is probably a case that a lot of people are not very familiar with, especially on an international level. But this is a major international case. This is the murder and the murder mystery of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, who was murdered on the street in Stockholm in 1986. And people will probably say, we don't know much about this. Maybe they heard about it. In Scandinavia, it was as big as JFK and Princess Diana, so everybody will remember it. But this is a case that goes way high up on an elite level, and it's an international case, and it's extremely complex, even more complex than I also imagined. And I know that you have so much information to share. And this is actually our part one of the Olof Palme murder case with Ole Dammegaard, who's been researching this for 30, 40 years. And then we're going to do part two with a Swedish researcher called Claes Hedberg, who is also coming here to Denmark and do a face-to-face table talk with me. So we're going to do two parts with two different researchers on this case. This is how massive, how fascinating this case is. But first of all, sit back because Ole has so much to share with all of you and a PowerPoint presentation. I know you're going to be very, very fascinated as we take you into unknown territory about this extreme mystery case of Olof Palme and what happened back then. Ole Dammegaard, it's wonderful to have you back here on the show. And I, first of all, didn't know that this case about what happened to Olof Palme was this big, this massive, and this mysterious, because we all heard that he was shot on the street by a lone gunman after walking home from the cinema with his wife. And it was a huge shock to everybody. And those who were children like myself at that time, very small, everybody knew about this. But, you know, he died. It was terrible. Oh my God, it can even happen in Sweden. And then we went on with our lives. But that's not how the real story is. And you have really gone so in depth that it's almost extraordinary. So, Ole, I just want to say, take it away, because you are the expert here.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to say that this is the biggest murder mystery in the world. It is the most expensive murder investigation in the world. The Swedish taxpayers have paid more than 2 billion Swedish kroner into the investigation, which until today have come up with more or less absolute zero. Yes, they have found people guilty, but then it turned out that they were not guilty. And once you start looking into the extreme depth of this case and what actually happened, which is, I tell you, I think you're going to be absolutely blown away once I start getting into what actually went down this day. You will see that, it's unbelievable that the world has not reacted yet. And also the first investigator of the case, his name was Hans Holmér, he said that if the real truth about this ever get out there, it will shake Sweden in its foundation. It will shake Sweden in its foundation. So please have that in mind when you start hearing about these things, because if a lone, drug addict had killed the prime minister by mistake, which was the first big thing, would that shake Sweden in its foundation? If CIA had killed him, would that shake Sweden in its foundation? If it was his wife that killed her, would that shake Sweden in its foundation? If it was KGB who killed him, would that shake? It would not. So there's a whole different level to this whole thing. And I'm going to go through step by step in a way that I hope will be easy for you to follow. But it is a super complex case. And so also if you are up for it, Lucas, we can always do a follow-up with questions from the viewers, and I'll be most happy to assist you in the best way I can.
That would be certainly interesting. And, you know, now that we are already going to do 2 parts also with Claes Hedberg from Sweden, I think this is really a case that actually deserves that we go in depth. So we could do that also, a live chat with the audience, and they could ask questions. But of course, first of all, they actually need to know what is the whole thing about. And now that you just said CIA, had it just been the CIA, had it just been the KGB, I mean, that's major already. But I mean, there's more to this, and it's unbelievable. I couldn't even comprehend that it was that complex.
Well, you're in for a ride. I want to say that it's so complex that many other researchers, they're shaking their head when I start talking. It's like, come on, he's just all over the place. He's involving too many things and trying to fit them together. I just want to say that I've devoted some 30 odd years trying to put together this massive, massive jigsaw, where I was also one of the few people in the beginning that was interested. I was part of a small little group of concerned citizens that was called Privatspanarna, the private detectives that were really trying to find out and who was ridiculed in media, who was like slapped around, who was all of these. But what I did was I went around to every single one of these. Most of them were men, older men, but with a major background, a massive background in law, police, customs, all kinds. These were not lightweights in that. And so I collected so much material from all of these people over the years. So what I put together is, like, I would say it without exaggerating, it's a historical document of what happened the first 5-10 years in this case, because so much has been deleted on the internet, in newspaper archives. It's just gone. It's just gone. But this book, it's called Coup d'etat in slow motion, or Statskupp i slow motion, and it's almost 1,000 pages, extremely detailed, with photos, lots of photos, names, documents. I am not hiding. I am going full on with this whole thing. Every single one, I'm pointing it out, their part and whatever. So I'm really, really happy that we do this after so many years, because there is an awakening going on in Sweden and other. I've been giving talks abroad, in Belgium and other countries. They have been interested, not Sweden, not Denmark. And for me, it's like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. But now, the last year or two, suddenly there's a handful of podcasts that are really going into great details, and there's like different YouTube channels that are really going for it, and so on. So there's something now that is being lifted. This veil is being lifted.
Apparently, and you and I have been talking about doing this for several years, actually, and we've done, I don't know how many shows with you, but we never got around to this case. But I do also remember way back in the past when we first talked about it, you said it's so complex that, maybe we have to wait a little bit. I don't know. I mean, because maybe it takes a lot of time, but now everything is, as you say, coming together with this. And maybe it was because it's just my suggestion here that Scandinavia was kind of numbed by what happened back then with the Olof Palme assassination. Everybody just took whatever they said in the press as face value and believed the official narrative and the story, So maybe that's probably why a lot of people have not been researching this. And, also one thing I just want to say before we go back to you is that after a certain while, as you know, people forget. Even about, even the Second World War, yes, grandmother or grandfather told you about it, but after a while, everybody forgets and nobody is kind of into that situation anymore. It's collective amnesia, but this is something that will make people understand how everything is connected.
Also, I just want to say, I've never said, let's wait. I've never said that. I said, let's go. And then things have delayed it. So, but also it is, the book title is not a coincidence. Coup d'etat in slow motion. You have coup d'etats, statskupps, where you got like the military takes over in some country. Boom, overnight, you got a completely new power behind the wheel. That's it, boom. But this one is like, boom, the shots on that, and then slowly moved into position. So the power structure that is in Sweden, and Sweden as a nation, is completely different now to what it was before these shots were fired. So it was a coup d'etat in slow motion. It is much bigger than just a murder. It is much bigger than the death of Olof Palme, much bigger, which I'm also going to show you. I tell you, the thing is, Olof Palme, in my world, he was not a very sympathetic individual. I didn't like him at all. He was arrogant and besserwisser, so it was not because of any kind of warm feeling to him that I've been putting 30 years in. It's to what has happened to this beautiful nation called Sweden, and with its tentacles all over the world, which we're going to come to. That has been my concern. So I have prepared a PowerPoint for you, and so I'm going to start it here. It's
Can I just ask, before you turn on the PowerPoint, Ola, do you think that Sweden is more, let's say, involved in the top elitist international power game than Denmark, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And absolutely, yes, not as a nation, but there is especially a family called Wallenberg, who is just unbelievably powerful behind the scenes, with their international network of businesses like Ericsson and Investor and ABB and SKF, and they're all over the place. And their motto is esse non videri, to rule or without visibility, to be in the background pulling the string, and that is exactly what they do. I had no idea about the.
Well, oh, can we see you while you're saying that? Yes, that would be nice. Yeah. So you talk about this family called Wallenberg, and I think you mentioned this before. They're more powerful than any family coming from Denmark. Is that what you're actually saying? They're more involved in the top elitist game.
I would say they're above the Rockefellers. They're above the Rothschilds. Yeah.
What? Really?
Yeah, they're above. People like George Soros is working for them. It's the structure. I had no idea. It's only the last few years that I've started to look into this, and it's just been absolutely mind-blowing. And I think I'm speculating now. This is pure speculation, but companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, that are, when you look on a global scale, are the most powerful companies with tentacle everywhere. When you start questioning who is behind these companies, I can almost, I mean, you can chop off my right arm if I'm wrong. The Wallenbergs are way up there, way up in the background behind these companies, and in the structure in the world and the control. Unbelievable.
That's extraordinary. I had no idea about that. I mean, yeah, I know that you've mentioned them before, and I think they're involved in a supermarket chain, or maybe not. That maybe that's another thing. But I didn't think it was, you know, as you say, bigger than the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. I mean, that's incredible. Do you think they're behind people like Greta Thunberg? Greta Thunberg and all these people?
I mean, Greta Thunberg is just one psychological operation on a lower level. You know, she is the head of a psychological operation pushing the whole climate change agenda, trying to make it into like a new world order religion, that the climate would be the thing that pushes us together, when they at the same time destroy all religions at the same time. So Greta is a 100% psyop, 100%, backed with massive PR agencies, and it was not a coincidence. She was not just sitting outside with a sign, "Come on," and all of the people that she is criticizing is then inviting her in so she can get these massive forums to listen. The whole thing is an incredible psyop, and she's in Davos very recently. You know, the whole, what can I say?
But absolutely. I'm just the reason I just mentioned is because, again, another let's say international figure coming from Sweden, again from Sweden, more so than Denmark and Norway, even though we know that Norway has also been quite involved with the Breivik case and Jens Stoltenberg and all these things. But that's another story. I know you know a lot about that, but this is the Palme case, and it's huge in itself. It was just an important question: how involved is Sweden? They seem to be at a focal point, a central point here in a European picture, at least.
No, global. And there's a reason why Sweden is neutral. There's a reason why Switzerland is neutral. These are the only neutral countries in the world. They are using that as a cover. So no, we are not, we don't get involved in fights. We don't get in, no, we just have one of the world's most advanced weapon factories and weapon technology that we sell everywhere, but we're neutral. We're not getting involved in death and destruction. Once you start seeing, and also the way they control the infrastructure of the internet through the whole digital control grid, where Ericsson is world leading in that whole thing, also the development of 5G, which is also Ericsson, and where all of these intelligence agencies with the surveillance, all of these, they rely on the technology of Ericsson for the surveillance. That whole infrastructure is built up by them. Encryption, the Wallenberg, Second World War, the encryption, all of that, it's the Wallenberg.
And Sweden wasn't occupied during the Second World War. They were actually home free there. They didn't have a lockdown during the past few years. Again, they were they had a free pass, and also the climate change agenda starts there, the feminist agenda, the transgender agenda. We see all of those things coming actually first from Sweden before they move into Denmark, this country.
Yep. Sweden is used as a test run thing, because the Swede normally is a weak individual when it comes to stand up for whatever they think. They're very, I mean, it's a peace-loving nation most of the time, you know, but also weak has up until now when it comes to saying, absolutely no, I'm just not doing it. So they've been using Sweden to test all of these things. How far can we push it into? We test it out in Sweden, and when will they say stop? When will they say stop? Boom. Okay, that's when they stop, and that's way down the line. And then they say, okay, now because Sweden has this beautiful reputation, we will just use it as a, you know, like a poster, a beautiful poster. Like if Sweden will do it, then why would you hesitate? So all of these things, when you look historically from the First World War onwards, there's always a Swede in the background. I never noticed that before. There's always a discrete Swede in the background, and all the big things in the world are Swede in the background, connected to this family. It's and then you have Sweden neutral there. You got Switzerland neutral, where they could hide the stash. You know, all these the incredible riches dipped in blood, diamonds, all of that in the banking system. Just push it down there, hide it there. But they're also neutral, so you can't say anything. No. They don't want to get involved. They're just hiding the stash. That is it.
Wow,
So
this is so fascinating. It really is fascinating. And also, by the way, we have the Swedish flag hanging from every building all over the world right now. Oh no, by the way, it's the Ukrainian flag, but it looks Swedish. It's all the same colors. It almost looks the same, you know, in a way. So it's like, this is always used to be what we, you know, associated with the Swedish flag.
Yeah. And if you look in the whole Ukrainian alleged war, the biolabs that was in the Ukraine, they're now been transported to Sweden by the Wallenbergs. They're being transported. What the hell are these bioweapon labs doing in Sweden? The whole thing is becoming transparent. They can't hide anymore. And so, yeah, that family, very nice looking. They look like nerds. They look very, you know, like with a nice little like haircut and glasses like that. And when they look very civilized, they're very nice like that. But the actions behind the scenes, oh my God. It's right
totally,
in our
it's
face.
very great that you're actually setting the scene here, because this will, you know, this will tell people a lot. Sweden is a very important center for whatever is going on, and that's why the Palme case is so also extraordinary. So I don't know how you want to go into the PowerPoint now and start.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know where to start here, but you certainly do, because you've been lecturing on this for years.
I'll take care of it. Yeah. So Wallenberg, and also Olof Palme was involved with the Wallenbergs very closely. He was a Bilderberger. He was a high-level politician in many different areas, internationally as well. You know, we're going to come into that. Not an amateur. He was very, very, very up there.
And I can't shut up right now, because there's so much exciting info. I know this is a little bit on an entertainment level, but, you know, supposedly Olof Palme had a love relationship to the American actress Shirley MacLaine. And she wrote this famous book that was made into a film called Out on a Limb. And there was this secret politician, and everybody says this was actually Olof Palme. I don't know if you will get into that also, but I just thought that would be interesting for people to be aware of when they hear all of this, how it's spread out internationally.
It was him. They had a love affair. And I have also in my book, I've got a signed photo from Shirley MacLaine that says, Ole, keep on writing. So I'm just saying, I'm backed by CIA people on a very high level, backed by George Bush Sr.'s private hitman, Shirley MacLaine, Jim Mars, all kinds of heavyweight researchers around the world that are backing me in what I'm saying. So
wow,
please see, this is not
fascinating stuff. Right. Okay.
So Maybe we should get the PowerPoint going. So I need to share sound. Yeah. Can you see that?
I can see it, yes. And
Okay,
this
so
is your book. Yeah.
I'll just get this going. So are you ready? Hold on to your horses.
We are ready.
That was a bit of Hollywood for you.
Oh, wow, amazing. What an intro.
So yeah, this is yeah, I'm gonna take you on a murder mystery tour that yeah, I think you're gonna, and I don't know if you're gonna enjoy it, but it's really gonna be mind-blowing, I can tell you that. And here's the book that I've written, Statskupp i slow motion, like it's 1,000 pages almost, and it's available in Swedish and English and German. So, and also, if you see here, there are connections to the Kennedy assassination, there's connections to the John Lennon assassination, the Bob Marley assassination, so many different, also the sinking of, or the blowing up of MS Estonia, killing almost 1,000 people, which if I'm right, this was part of covering up this case, that they needed to shut up a whole group of people, and when they put them on this ferry, and to make it so that nobody would notice that they were actually the target. They needed to hide this group of 69 people in a big crowd so that we wouldn't understand who was actually the target. And so almost 1,000 people got affected. More than 800 people died in this thing. So very, very tragic. But anyway, I want to say also, I want to dedicate this this PowerPoint here to my friend Gösta Söderström, who was the first police on site when Olof Palme was shot, and who also stepped up. It was his courage that has really been part of messing it up for these dark forces, because he stood by what he saw as true, and never wavered, and they destroyed him. His whole career was destroyed, everything was destroyed, and he refused to bend over. So I want to give it to him. So here, anyway, we got the official version. So what happened officially? On February 28th, 1986, it is said that Olof Palme, the Swedish prime minister, was murdered. They were, he and his wife had decided to go to the cinema together with Olof Palme's son, Morten, and his girlfriend. And so they lived in the old town of Stockholm, and they walked without bodyguards, all of these things. They got on the subway. There were witnesses that saw that there were people following them with walkie-talkies on the way to the subway. But otherwise than that, everything was normal. They got to the Grand Cinema in central Stockholm, which is also very central in the whole Social Democrat party scene, because right across the street is where the Social Democrats headquarters is, and next door to the right is the so-called ABF house, which is also Social Democrat. So this was one of the points in the center of where he was moving around.
Yeah,
so anyway,
I just want to jump in here because Olof Palme was the prime minister for the Social Democrats, and he was in power for quite a long time in Sweden, wasn't he? More than what they usually are, or I don't know how long, but it seems like he's been there for a long time, 10 years or so.
Yeah, he was in and out a lot. And the Social Democrats in Sweden was not just a party, it was a power factory. They were in power for, I believe, more than 40 years in Sweden, more or less in one go. So not just a party, it was like the whole society was integrated around the Social Democrat Party and the Wallenberg family in the background with their companies. They had, I believe, more than 40% of the Swedish population were working for the Wallenbergs through their different companies. So a major part of that. Anyway, so when the cinema was finished, a few minutes after 11 in the evening, Palme went out together with his wife, his son and girlfriend was there. They were like discussing, should we walk home or do you want to come and grab a cup of tea with Morten and his girlfriend? They decided, no, we're going to walk home. They could have taken the subway, but they decided to walk home. It was winter, it was quite cold and a little windy, but otherwise than that, they decided to walk home, which is about a couple of kilometers, I think.
And so I just think it's interesting to point out, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but for American audiences and people around the world to hear that a prime minister, the man who's in charge of the country, basically, that he would take a subway in Sweden is very, very unusual for a lot of people. I mean, usually these heads of states are very guarded with bodyguards and they just don't walk around alone. So that's maybe an interesting observation here.
And this was what made Sweden different. This was also why it was such an incredible shock when it happened, because Sweden, you had the prime minister on a bicycle going to work, you know, and stuff like that, which was absolutely opposite everywhere else. So Sweden once again had this very special appearance of everything is fine, everything is incredible. I grew up in this country, you know, I was born in Denmark, but I grew up in Sweden. I thought it's this wonderful island of, you know, white purity, no violence, no corruption, no thing. So for me to understand what actually went down was absolutely shocking once I started digging into this, because it got me to understand that the country I grew up in was just an illusion, because there were other things going on in the background. Anyway, so they decided to walk home without bodyguards. They walked down a street called Sveavägen. It's one of the longest streets in central Stockholm. And on the way, they crossed the street. Lisbeth, the wife, wanted to check out some clothes store. And then they walked towards a corner where there was an art shop called Dekorima. And there, around the corner, a man was standing. He was being observed by several witnesses, waiting. And so when the Palme couple passed him, he stepped forward, put his hand on the shoulder of Olof Palme, put a gun in his back, fired one shot straight through his body. So Palme were more or less dead when he folded over and fell on the pavement. And then he fired a second shot towards Lisbeth. At least this is the official story. The official version is that she was pulled down in this whole scenario. When he fell, she was pulled down, and so the shot missed her, but it went in through her coat and made like a stripe over her back and passed up. So she was only a millimeter or so from dying, very, very close to dying, according to the official story. Then the shooter, he fired two shots, and then the shooter escaped. He took into dark, what do you call it, like a dark passageway, and then ran up these very beautiful stairs. He went up on the left-hand side, went up all the way up, and that is more or less the last observation.
It looks like the staircase in The Exorcist. Have you seen that film?
I have, but
actually with Max von Sydow, who was the great Swedish actor, who was like throwing that girl, whatever, out of the window, and they wrote down that the same kind of looking staircase there in somewhere in America. It just just gave me an association when you showed me that picture here.
I'm going to look into that. It's a very unusual looking, very scenic, dramatic stairs. You know, so here we have where the shots were fired here by the X, and then the shooter went in Tunnelgatan. He crossed this little street, Luntmakargatan, and then he went up the stairs up to Malmskillnadsgatan. And then a couple that was on their way home observed a man running on the right-hand side of the street, David Borgers gata, looking like he was putting something in a handbag, a blue handbag, and they said it looked like he was in pain when he was running. And then they just observed him run down the street, and that's the last official observation of the alleged killer. Here is the street. He ran down on the right-hand side of this, and then at the end of the street, that's the last time anyone saw anything there. Okay, so things that didn't match up, and I'm just putting a few things here, you know. So when the whole thing had happened, he was shot. He was dead on the pavement. My friend Gösta Söderström came as one of the first police vehicle on site. He got out there. The wife was there, screaming, running around. There were some people helping to try and give him mouth to mouth, but she was pulling them away from him. It was very odd that she was trying to stop them from helping him. But anyway, he stepped forward, Gösta, and then he knelt next to the body, and he didn't see that it was Olof Palme. There was blood everywhere in the face, but he put his he told me he put his finger on the eye of the body. Apparently that is one way to check if somebody's dead or not, because of the reaction. He said that person there was dead. And then he stood up, and Lisbeth said, can't you see who I am? I'm Lisbeth Palme, and that's my Olof. That was the first time he sort of like, whoa, he had no idea that it was Olof Palme lying there, even though Olof Palme had a very big nose. I mean, a hawk nose, extremely perfect for caricatures and stuff like that. Big nose, but he didn't recognize him.
So may I just ask you this, because this is a very important thing. Your friend was in the police in Stockholm and was not involved, you say. He was a good guy, and he revealed things to you, and you became friends. He was there on the scene, and he met Lisbeth Palme, the wife, who said, can't you see who this is? And he could not see that this was the prime minister. He could not see that this was Lisbeth Palme or what?
No, and Lisbeth Palme, in those days, were not very well known. She was a kind of gray-looking individual, very discreet. And no, he did not know. And Gösta was the highest commander in central Stockholm that evening. It was his job to oversee, but this was a very quiet evening. It was the end of the so-called winter vacation called Sportlovet in Sweden. So Stockholm was very, very empty compared to like on a normal Friday night. So, and he was coming up another street called Kungsgatan, when somebody who has never been identified to this very day jumped out in front of him and stopped the car and said, somebody has been shot, murder on Sveavägen. So that was what alerted him. So he and his driver took off, went around the corner, went down to where this whole thing happened, wrote down the time when they arrived, and then went out to see this whole scene.
So they weren't arranged to be there or called, they didn't call them. This was by accident, and maybe they weren't supposed to be there, your friend who was the police officer or what, or commissioner or whatever he was.
I'm going to come back to this, because this man who stopped them has never been identified. Never, ever. So what was that? Because he came as the first vehicle on location. We're gonna come back to this whole thing because it's really intricate once you get into it. But anyway, the first alarm, all of these things, instead of that, you know, all police forces in Stockholm being alerted that they started shutting down airports and train stations and ferries and whatever, nothing happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. Instead, it was delayed for hours. And the official story why it was delayed was that they said that, well, we had to move some computers to another room to get some more privacy, and we couldn't connect computer screens. So These hours that it was delayed was because they couldn't connect a cable into a computer. I mean, really? But that's the official story. And it, very odd is that people in the US knew about this assassination before people in Sweden. People in Italy knew about this before people knew about it in Sweden. How is that possible? We had a film director called Lars Molin, who was he was at an airport in the US. This was before anything had been published in Sweden, and people at the airport said, "We're very sorry to hear about your loss." And he was like, "What?" "Well, your prime minister has been shot down." So he called home and said, "What the hell? What has happened?" And they said, "What do you mean?" Had no idea. So people in the US, and there was also in Italy, they knew about this murder before it went public in Sweden. So the first alarm, Lisbeth was interrogated, and she said she had seen two men. Okay, so the first alarm went out at 2:05 a.m. in the morning, which was like more than almost like 2.5 hours after the murder. They went out, but very locally, the alarm just went to very specific vehicles in central Stockholm, not out like this. And she said she had seen two men. So that was the thing, two men. And then 3 hours later, 5:06 a.m., suddenly the second alarm went out, and this one went out much bigger. And now the description was one man. Has never been explained what happened to the two men, and how could it suddenly be one man? Okay, so when we start seeing also like the number of vehicles that came to site and like that, nobody has seen a lot of vehicles. It was just like a few that came on site, but the official narrative and the official documents, if you see it 23:23, that's like 2 minutes after the shots were fired. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 16 or 17 vans and police vehicles on site, they say. The ambulance was called at 23:29. I mean, nobody has seen these vehicles, absolutely not. And they also put the wrong day and the wrong date on these ones. And here's another one written out on a typewriter where the dates doesn't stand up. And also the description of this man was that he had a blue special coat like this one, and a knitted hat like this. But that description has went out, and it has been in all documentaries. When you see about this murder, the murder is dressed like this. But this was one of the witnesses. His name is Anders Björkman, who was like 10-15 meters from the place when the shots were fired. And somehow they made his clothes the description of the murder. It was absolutely not him. And also, when you hear people, witnesses that saw what happened, they didn't describe him dressed like this at all. Also, when we start putting together around this, what was coming up to this night, there was a lot of walkie-talkie observations around where Olof Palme lived in the old town of Stockholm, also around the subway, also where he was on the way to the site, to the cinema, but also weeks before, there were a lot of observations of people with walkie-talkies. And in those days, there were no cell phones. So it couldn't be like, well, they were speaking in a phone. No, these were big, some of them military-looking walkie-talkies. All of these observations, there's between 50 and 200 observations of walkie-talkie. I'm not saying that there were 200 people with walkie-talkie. I'm saying that there were 200 people that saw somebody with a walkie-talkie. Somewhere between 50 and 200, depending on what source you're looking at. All of them has been disregarded, has been like shoved to the side, where people have been harassed. Witnesses have been ridiculed, harassed, pushed over, terrified. all of them have been, not one of them have been officially accepted. And like, for instance, when people started the day after, or the hours after this whole thing happened, when they started calling in saying, you know, I've seen this, I've seen that, the police was absolutely not interested at all, at all. It's only the prime minister of a nation that should not be taken lightly, if you ask me. But here, like this this woman, she saw three men run down this street, which is a parallel street to Sveavägen. When the Palme couple were walking down the street, the Sveavägen, there were three people running in the middle of the street down this street, like following them parallel like this. And so she thought, whoa, it was at that exact time I saw them. So she calls in and she said, well, I saw three people running towards where he was shot. I thought I wanted to call in. And they said, so what did they look like? And she said, well, one of them were blonde. And they said, thank you so much, but we're not looking for blondes. And then they just dismissed her. And that was not just one or two. It was every single witness that actually saw somebody. They were not called in. They were not interrogated. They were not, it was on the contrary, they had to force their way to actually be interrogated. They had to really insist on, and sometimes they were called like 3-4 years later. Also, the official story said that there were 2 ambulances that came just after the shots were fired. Nobody has seen 2, but it's super complicated what happened around these ambulances and how the body of Olof Palme was taken from the murder site to the hospital and what happened around there. To this very day, major mystery. Also, when the ambulance was officially arriving to the hospital, that time has been manipulated as well. They changed the time because it didn't match up they just couldn't get there in time the way that it was. And the reason why my friend Gösta Söderström got so smashed up by these forces was because he stood rock steady and said, I arrived at this exact time. And the thing is that the vehicles that then came afterwards, they came 6 minutes before the first alarm went out. How could they know 6 minutes before that something has actually happened? And they tried to force Gösta to change his story and said that, no, okay, I came 6 minutes later. But he said, absolutely not. And then they tried to say, well, he was so shocked that it was the prime minister, that he was walking around as a zombie for 6 minutes, and that was why this whole thing. Absolutely not. Gösta told me, like, I worked, as a police chief for more than 30 years. I've seen burnt babies. Do you think I would be shocked by seeing somebody I didn't even recognize, that it was the prime minister, that would sort of freak me out like that? Absolutely not. But this was what destroyed his life, that he did not bend over. And then there's also this whole thing with the times that doesn't match up. They say that that was also why they had to manipulate the arrival time of the ambulance, because it came like 6 minutes too late. And so when asking the crew of the ambulance, they said, well, we couldn't find the hospital. These ambulances are driving that route every single day. I don't know, hundreds of times, no, but like multiple times a day to Sabbatsbergs sjukhus. And this time they just couldn't find their way. That was why they got delayed, because they had to stop and like, okay, so is it a right here? Should I turn left here? I'm sorry, I've only been here like a few thousand times. I can't remember. So, yeah. And then Hans Holmér, this is the guy. He was the first murder investigator who had never led a murder investigation ever. He was a former chief of the secret police in Sweden, Säpo, the security police. And also at this point, he was the chief of police for Stockholm. But he had never been in charge of a murder investigation. Even though that, he just came in, took over everything, and suddenly pushed away all the normal guys that was, heavyweights in murder investigations, pushed them to the side. They were absolutely just neglected and so on. And he took over from day one. And right away after they had, only very few days after, they said that we're now sure what the murder weapon is. It's a Smith & Wesson 357. And he was having this press conference that he was showing these guns. And the reason that he pointed this gun out, this specific gun, was because they had found bullets on the crime site. We're going to come to them. But the thing is, the bullets that were found with the, I don't know what that is in English, but the bullet, when it goes through the barrel on the inside, you got like, it makes specific marks, and the drilling, or the whatever you call that, on the inside of the barrel, it's very different from gun to gun. But the millimeter of these things, there are 8 different weapons, 8 different types of weapons that have the identical dimension on these things. So it could be a Taurus, it could have been a Ruger, it could have been all of the 8 different types of weapons. Why did they go out straight away and say it's a 357 Magnum? And that is the only thing they focused on from day one. You could even have like a Smith & Wesson 44 with an injected barrel to change the caliber. You have these standard equipment. Like, why did they rule out like all of these weapons? All of them, they said, this is the one, and that's what they've been looking for from day one. And like other weapon experts that I've interviewed said, we have no idea. Why did he say that? It's just weird, because it doesn't match up. And so here are the 2 bullets that was found, and are the ones that is said to have killed them, to have killed one, who have killed Olof Palme, and the other one fired at his wife. So how were these bullets found? Because like a 357 Magnum, it's like a cannon. It's like Dirty Harry. He had a Smith & Wesson 44.
Yes, actually, it actually looks a little bit old-fashioned, that gun, like something what you just said, like a Clint Eastwood film or something.
It was the gun.
The gun. Okay.
It was the most powerful handgun in the world, more or less, at the time. So a heavy duty thing. But anyway, so how did they find these bullets? Because with a gun like that and special ammo, it was Smith and Winchester with a special bullet, and also the charge. All of it was extremely powerful. A metal piercing, could go straight through a bulletproof vest. These are the type of guns you can fire and you can stop a car, because it just breaks the engine block. Hardcore. So where were these bullets found? Were they found like 3 miles south of where it happened, because it just like that, or 4 kilometers in that direction, or which would be, with that power, even though it goes straight through a body, it could still continue like a long way. So how were they found? Well, the ones that was shot at Lisbeth, they say it was this guy called Alfred de Tavares, who is an Indian freelance journalist who had very odd background things. He had been working for Indian military intelligence, but also been in the Portuguese army. Anyway, so he said that he was 6 o'clock Saturday morning, which was in the morning after this assassination is said to have happened. He was listening to the radio, and they said, boom, Olof Palme has been murdered, and blah, blah, blah. So he said, okay, I'm gonna put myself in self-hypnotic trance and to activate my senses. So he went in there, and he felt like on the other side of the street where the crime scene was, I'm sure they've looked there, but on this side, nobody has looked. So he put himself in self-hypnotic trance, and was walking around. Where's the bullet? Where's the bullet? And then he opened his eyes and he found the bullet in a waste paper basket, that or under, depending on who you listen to, but on top of a pile of snow. So where was that? It was 40 meters away from where the shots were fired. The bullet completely intact, which is normally not the case at all. It gets all smashed up. And so the positions of the bullet, here is the site where he was killed. Okay, so the Olof Palme bullet was found 37 hours after the assassination. So where was it found? Was it found like 2 miles down the road? Did it ricochet, all across the whole shebang, and was found like totally demolished, but in different places? No, it was found here on the backside of that concrete pillar. That is where it was found. You tell me how is it possible that that bullet could end up there behind that pillar? I mean, they didn't find it at the first crime scene investigation. The technical team did not find, the forensic team didn't find anything. And then 34 or 37 hours later, it was found just behind this concrete pillar. You go figure, that is weird. And this is where the Lisbeth bullet was found, on the other side of the street, not in the direction the shots were fired, because they were fired officially going down towards Sergels Torg, a lot more south, but here, more or less straight across the street. So the first DA that was involved in this, his name was K.G. Svensson, he said, oh my God, I mean, this is unbelievable. But he didn't doubt it. He just said, we have to make an investigation of the whole thing, because there must have been like marks of a ricochet, from the pavement up on that, and then that, and soon. So we need to check to find out what the hell happened. And then he got fired. He got fired, never to be seen again. Why behind the pillar? I think when you look at the pillar is there, can you see just to the left of the subway sign? I believe that the hours afterwards, all of the people that was gathered there, also the crime scene that they blocked off, was so small, so small. We're talking like maybe 80 square meters, 120, I mean, ridiculously small, just with plastic bands. So the only place where there was not people, because people started gathering in the hundreds, throwing flowers into the crime scene, and that was okay. They didn't mind that this crime scene that should be not infected, as they say, suddenly people were, walking in there and throwing flowers, and didn't matter. They didn't. But where is the only place where there was no people? It's behind the pillar. So if you want to place a bullet there, if you're there in the crowd and you discreetly drop it, and maybe it falls on the foot on someone, and they say, oh, sorry, you dropped something. Hello, it's a bullet. You can't really do that, So I believe somebody went behind that pillar, went down and fixed their shoelaces or whatever, and just placed it there in the snow, and then left. It's the only place where there was no people. We're going to come back to that. You can see here as well, the crime scene, how it was cornered off. And that is the only place where there was no people. I just want to go back to this is the blood from Olof Palme, they say. That blood was bright red the whole following day. When you look at blood, what it normally does is that it goes from, depending on where the wound is, you can have like bright pink, depending on if the oxygen level, depending on if it's going in or out from the heart, but to a darker red. But once it's out there, it goes through different stages of gelatin and other ways where it starts changing character. And then also it starts getting darker and darker, and it's sucked into the middle. And then after a while, it goes, I think after 7 or 9 hours, it goes black and it starts cracking up. Here, the blood, even the day after, all of these photos you see of the murder, you see the blood, you see the flowers, there's daylight. There's daylight. That is the day after, because the thing happened at 11:20 in the evening. So how is that possible if it was real blood? Then also all of the radio communication between the ambulances and the police and all of these things were very strange. It was very hard for us to get. Now I'm talking back in the 80s and 90s. It was super difficult for us to get it out, you know. So once we got these tapes out, we started checking them, and it just didn't make any sense. The timing was weird, and it was like very odd. And there was these brothers in Sweden called Puttiainen, who wrote a massive book, like a boring thing for anyone else than people like myself, fascinating, where they went through these 6 minutes that didn't match up. And just with the tapes and the recordings and all of just pointing out, it doesn't match up. It doesn't match up. It does. Somebody has manipulated these major. And so we had this guy who was in this group of privatspanare, who he was an expert on audio. And there was this, what do you call it? Fröken Ur, the one that in those days when you said, like, you picked up the phone and you could hear like 16, 02, and 10 beep.
Oh, like a clock, an automated clock, somebody who, exactly. A speaker.
Yeah, so you could call that up if you want to check the time or whatever. But also these official channels for ambulance and police had these things in the background at all times, so that you could hear, okay, 16, 02, and 50, beep, 16, 03, and, you know, beep, like that. But what he found when he was really analyzing these was that there was 2 of these machines. In those days, they were like tape recorders. And there was like the original one, and then there was one that seemed to be used on standby if the other one messed up. And on one of them, there was a tiny little click sound, you know, with 16, 02, and 10. You know, he noticed that. And then with that, we managed to, when we started looking at these tapes, sometimes it was with a click sound, sometimes it was not, meaning somebody had added that afterwards with the other machine, you know. So the ones with its tick sound didn't match up with the other one. So we started seeing that, oh my God, here's a manipulating, that's manipulated, that is not, that is, but the timing, and because it should have been like there was a click sound on all of it, or not, you know. So once again, very odd. And like these tape recordings, when we started really digging into them, they disappeared. Oh, it's only the murder of a prime minister. So they disappeared, and then they said, well, first they recorded over them because they needed to use the spare space, you know, on these tapes. They're very expensive, extremely, like exclusive, absolute bullshit, not. And then they said, well, we burned them. What a pity. Then it was suddenly found in a safe, and so it came back. And then I think they disappeared again. And then it's like, what is going on? And please ask yourself, could anyone manipulate like the documents, the sound recordings, or if they were a drug addict, or if they were somebody who didn't have access to the evidence material? Who would have the power? Who could get access? Who could do that? Can you see we're starting to get into a different area here, and somebody is trying to cover their butts. There's something going on here that is not right. And anyway, so right after the assassination, Hans Holmér, who was the first investigator of this crime, he ordered up 2 hunter, what do you call it, the fighter planes, and he's to take photos of the whole of the central Stockholm, because he said they were looking for the gun. They were thinking maybe the shooter had thrown the gun up on a roof. When you're in central Stockholm, I tell you, I really challenge anyone who can throw anything up on these buildings. I mean, they're high, So would anyone like boom and then, hello, I'm going to 1, 2, 3. No, it came down again. What a bomber. I'm going to try. It's only loaded maybe, so I'm going to shoot myself in the head. I'm going to see if I can throw it up there again. No. So anyway, he ordered these 2 fighter jets up there, and they flew over central Stockholm with cameras. Then when they landed, the films were gone. Oh, they had forgotten to load the cameras. So I'm like, okay, if this is a murder investigation on that level, send up the planes again, put in film and send it up there again. No. I'm going to come back to what they were actually doing. So they only cost the taxpayers yet another fortune to send them up, but unfortunately, they forgot to load them. Then we have the wife's strange behavior, Lisbeth Palme, strange behavior. So it's taken 30 years for this police officer that spoke to her at the hospital to come forward and say what actually happened. He has been keeping a very low profile. Anyway, so what she was saying is that all of these things were going on. Her husband was dead in the next room. And then she says, well, by the way, I've been shot as well. And they were, what? Nobody had noticed anything. And she said, yes, I've been shot as well. So should we have a doctor check you out? No. Nobody has seen it. Nobody, doctor has said, but it's been described. One person who saw it said it was like a red whip mark. And the other one said it was like a canal, 3 to 5 millimeters. 3 to 5 millimeters, that is a real thing, especially if it's across your back. And I mean, that would be severely bleeding, or also with the shoulder blades but they said that the whip mark was between the shoulder blades. I don't know about your body, but my shoulder blades are like that, and then between it goes down like this. So, well, anyway, has never been examined or anything like that. So we go back to what she remembered from the crime scene, because in the beginning, she said, I didn't see anything. I didn't see what they looked like, what the shooter looked like. I didn't see any features. It was dark. Also because the lighting over the crime scene was taken out. The lamps didn't work. So it was all dark there. She said she saw nothing. So she remembered nothing until Hans Holmér, the first investigator, and the chief of the Swedish criminal police. Is that what you call it? Criminal police. I don't know what that is in English, but the top in Sweden. They went home to speak to Lisbeth, and from remembering nothing, suddenly she remembered everything about what he looked like. His features, the high cheekbones. It looked like he had shaven off a mustache. He was dark. He was like, all of these things. Where did that come from? And I've spoken to witness psychologists, and they say when your memory gets better over time, you have to watch out, because that is not how memory works. You remember the most just when it happened, and then it starts fading. Also, I just want to point out these 2 key people in this murder investigation, Hans Holmér and Tommy Lindström, were both said they behaved very odd at the time of the assassination. Let's take Tommy Lindström, the guy with the mustache here, the head of the crime squad in Sweden. The head. Okay, so in his book, Mitt liv som snut, my life as a cop, he says that on the 1st of March, which was the morning after the assassination, he went out and checked it was his birthday that day. So a little after 5 in the morning, he went out, got the newspaper, and opened it up and said, Olof Palme murdered. So as this loyal police officer, he thought, well, my children have been planning to have sort of like a treasure hunt because it's my birthday and I don't want to disappoint them. So he said he went back to bed, and then he pretended to be asleep. They came in and happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And then he went on a treasure hunt, and he found like this ice hockey club like that. And then he went to work, and he arrived at 11 a.m. 11. Tell me, if you are the head of the whole thing in Sweden, your prime minister had been shot, don't you think it would be time to get your thumb out your butt and get going in there? Same with Hans Holmér. He's said to have been up north to go on a ski Vasaloppet, you know, this big ski competition. He's also said to first have arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning, same time as this guy.
They were not in a hurry, obviously, huh?
And also the arrogance to write things like that in a book. I mean, I don't know how they see us as brain dead individuals, but I mean,
yeah, that is certainly extraordinary that he wrote that in a book, you say, and even just to write things like that, like going to bed for his birthday. I mean, how does that even happen that you would write something like that?
You tell me. I just read his book and I was like, what? Anyway, so you had another one, a really hardcore crime investigator, murder investigator. His name was Arne Irvel. So he was the hunter in these cases, the heavyweight that in Sweden. And so he was at home. He said that he was at home, and then at 7 o'clock he put on the radio, Olof Palme has been murdered. He was like, what? So he calls in and says, what the hell happened? Why didn't you call me? And they said, at his work, they said, well, since it's a like high level case, we thought that it's going to take a lot of you, so we thought it would be good for you to have a good night's sleep, and so you would be well rested when you came. And then Arne Irvel, I mean, he was furious, and so he went into work and he was like, what the hell? I mean, what's going on? And then they put him to answer phone calls from media instead of taking part of the murder hunt. So and it's not only him, but all of the real heavyweights were put aside, and instead they put handpicked individuals that self-appointed them, that appointed themselves to this. How is that even possible? But anyway, that's what happened. Then we had a few days after this, they made a reconstruction of the crime, which is standard in these cases. And so they had all of the witnesses around this evening, everybody that had seen something. The only one that was not there was Lisbeth Palme. The key witness was not there. And they said, no, it was in consideration of her because it was so emotional. I was like, what? Well, she was not there. And here's another one. When she went officially, she jumped into the ambulance together with Olof Palme and drove towards being transported to Sabbatsbergs sjukhus in the ambulance. But when she arrived, she came in a police car. There was a press photographer that took a photo of her when she arrived. How did that swap happen? It's only like a short little ride. How did that happen with the ambulance turning into a police car?
And nobody saw her go from the ambulance into a police car.
No. And then you have the coat that she has on here when she runs into the hospital is not the same coat that was put forward with bullet holes in it.
No, apparently. There's a belt on the other one and a hood, and I don't know what that is. Maybe that's also a hood on the collar one. I don't know.
They don't look alike at all. You see,
No.
it's like,
Yeah, it's not the same.
and then a few years after that, because they went through a whole lot of different patsies that they tried to nail for this thing, and then finally, in 2 years after it happened, they found this guy called Christer Pettersson, who is officially the guy, in many people's way of looking upon it, that was guilty. There were a slight little problem there because he had alibi. He had a perfect alibi where a vicar, believe it or not, a vicar had seen him drunk and asleep in a subway car up north of Stockholm at the time of the assassination. So he had a 100% alibi. But instead of that, a few years later, they were looking for people to nail, I would say. And anyway, on the papers, when they interrogated him for something completely different, he was there to support a witness testimonial from one of his friends, and one of the police officers had written next to him, suitable type, for what? Anyway, so he was taken.
And that's
in.
number 7 on that picture.
It's on number 7. There were 2 different confrontations. You see, one he has number 3, one he has number 7. And so
didn't Christer Pettersson say that he was not guilty, that he had not killed Olof Palme?
Not at all. Not at all. Like I said, he was seen north of Stockholm in a subway car. He could not have done it. But in this case, logic doesn't matter at all. So,
but he never came out publicly and say, I didn't do it. I was not responsible.
He said that many times.
Many times. Okay.
But they tried to really get to him. They offered him a lot of money. This was a drug addict. He couldn't remember half of what he was doing when he was on coke and all kinds of stuff, He was perfect. He was violent. He had killed a guy not far from the site with a bayonet. He was perfect. He said weird things. He looked weird. He was perfect.
So do you think they used him because they knew he had a violent history and he had a police record?
Absolutely. Why did they write suitable type? He fit in not as a killer, but as a patsy. They knew he wasn't guilty.
And he was more disposable in a way because he wasn't, he wasn't himself really because he was on drugs and totally out of it.
He was observed in the north of Stockholm in the suburbs by a vicar at the time of the assassination. That is normally a 100% alibi that you don't have to. That proves that he was innocent. But here they just forgot about the vicar, all of these things. Nope. And so they called in Lisbeth, the wife of Olof Palme, to identify him. And so they said before the confrontation, they said, we have a guy, he's an alcoholic in about 40, and we really think he's the one who did it. Okay, so the first thing she said when she saw this is like, well, it's easy to see who's the alcoholic. And then she pointed him out. Then the son of Olof Palme came in, and when he was walking around, he said, I remembered that he had light-colored shoes. And so here, it's the only guy with the light-colored shoes. So he pointed him out because he had light-colored shoes. I'm like, maybe he has changed shoes in 2 years. Is it possible that he might have a different pair of shoes on? And also, Morten hadn't seen him at all because he was at the cinema, not by the place where he was shot. But that's how they nailed him. And then when it came to a trial, Lisbeth refused the media to be there when she gave her testimony. So they cleared the courtroom and put the international media in the next room. And so she refused that any sound recording also. any photos, anything. And they had like an 8-second delay from when they're recording in one room to the next one. What does that tell you? That is, if she says something that is not following they have a way of interfering in, and stopping her. And the international media that were there, they said, this is unheard of. This is unheard of. What is going on? And they say, well, out of respect for the widow, we just have to. You don't have to do anything. That is absurd. I mean, unbelievable. Are you seeing we're getting into some weird areas here? So we have the death certificate of Olof Palme. Okay. It's only the Prime Minister of Sweden. So you think you should get it right. So we have that here. And then it says his address is Storkyrkobrinken 31. That is so not true, because his real address, which everybody knew, was Västra Långgatan 31. Storkyrkobrinken 31. This is a street that doesn't even have 31 numbers. So what the hell is that? And then when you put it in Google, that address that doesn't exist, it takes you to the castle and also to some buildings that is connected to the government. It's also, I think I'm trying to find out, but many years ago, in the 1700s, I think there was 1733 or something like that, we had a king murdered in Sweden, Gustav III. He was murdered. And his assassin, Ankarström, who was part of the conspiracies, were killed by a mob. And as far as I know, it's exactly in this location. So I'm like, whoever wrote that address, it's not whoever, he was the chief coroner. His name was Milan Valverius. He wrote that address. Why?
So it's like occult symbolism here.
And then you have the official autopsy report. We have Olof Palme fired one shot through the body. Boom. Shouldn't really be such a mysterious thing. But the autopsy protocol looks like this. And it took us 8 years to get this out.
There's a lot you're not allowed to read there, huh?
Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why?
Do we know what was written there, where all of this is blacked out?
Yeah, I do now. After many, many, many years, I managed to get hold of the original.
Oh.
But the weird thing is that there's nothing strange in the thing that is blacked out. I'm going to come back to that. I even showed this to Silhouette, who is one of the world's most famous coroners in the world. He is the guy that in every JFK documentary, he's the guy who pointed out the magic bullet and all of these things that is not correct. He's been involved in the Martin Luther King case, O.J. Simpson, Sharon Tate, many of these high-level cases. I showed this to him, and with the original that I had translated, where you can see everything. And he said, I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. They blacked out stuff that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's nothing to hide there, but apparently there is. Gonna come back to that as well. And then Milan Valverius, this is the guy, the coroner, that did the autopsy, that also did the death certificate. He kept saying the real truth is in the autopsy report. It is in the autopsy report. And then he committed suicide together with his wife. A real sort of like Romeo and Juliet. They decided to kill themselves at the very same day. Oh, it was so romantic.
They both committed suicide? Really? Wow.
You tell me. They're both dead, and they died on the very same day. And that was after he was he kept saying the real truth is there, the real truth is there, the real truth is there. Also, what happened was that when Olof Palme's body was taken to Seoul, not to the forensic pathologist institute, I don't know the correct English name of it, where they were going to check everything out, suddenly there was a bomb threat, and so they had to clear the area, and then the body of Olof Palme disappeared. Yes. And it wasn't found. Of 2 days it was missing. This is not official, but 2 days it was missing, and then it was found in a hearse out by Södra Skogskyrkogården. And this was at a point where Olof Palme's speechwriter or secretary, he said, when he's talking about this is when the whole world is coming towards the funeral, you know, they invited everybody, all of the dignitaries from all over the world. They came from everywhere, came to this ceremony. And and he says, and it was so strange because at that time we didn't even know he was dead. So they're gathering to a funeral, but he says, yes, and he's just saying it sort of like he's not making a statement. He's just saying, yeah, and at that point we weren't even sure he was dead.
Oh.
So the patsies, we had very quickly, they went out with this phantom image saying, this is the murderer from, I mean, where did that come from? It came from an art student that was, she passed the area, not where the crime happened, but like half a kilometer from there, half an hour or so later than the assassination. And she met this guy who was like, he pulled up his coat a bit like that when they met. And this woman used to go home. She loved drawing. So she made like a portrait. That's what she did often, you know, when she got home. Then the day after, she heard that Olof Palme had been murdered, and she thought maybe this guy had something to do with it. Who knows? So she tried to contact the police. They didn't want to hear from her. They refused to interrogate her. So through a connection she had on local radio, the radio station got in touch with the police, and then they say, okay, let's bring her in. So she showed her drawing. That's the one to the right. And then the murder investigation, she said she was European looking, like Cassandra, like you know, like middle blonde, whatever you want to call it, dark blonde, in his 40s, walking towards. Then they called for a special team in Wiesbaden, Germany, where Wiesbaden is a special place for FBI and CIA. They had experts that came up with a special machine where they can sort of like construct human-looking faces. Like you could change the eyes, change the ears, change the hair. And so from her drawing to the right of a European-looking guy, they came up with this guy who looked very not European, if you ask me. And then they pumped that out over the whole world, saying, this is the murderer. This is somebody that is not even observed near the crime scene.
So the photograph, Ola, is actually photoshopped, or an early version of Photoshop. This is not a real human. This is something they tampered with that picture and created it from the drawing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is what they did in those days. You know, when they had witnesses, then they could say, oh, how old was he? Was he fat? Was he small? They could just exchange eyes, ears, hair, and then try to make a composite, as they called it, and then print it out as a photo. Mm-hmm. So it's not a real photo. It's just a composite built on that drawing. I don't think they look alike at all. So the first guy that they tried to get for this murder was a guy that went on they call him the 33-year-old Victor Gunnarsson. Very strange individual that was in the area of odd things, possibly also this assassination, but a guy not involved in the shooting itself, absolutely not. And they really tried to get him and nail him for it, but he was released after a while. His whole life was destroyed. Then he, a few years later, because he couldn't move around without being recognized, he moved to the US, and there he was found murdered, naked, with 2 shots in the head, 1 in the mouth and 1 in the head. Then they went for the Kurdish PKK. If you ask me, the reason they went for PKK, the biggest supporter they had was Olof Palme. He was the only politician internationally that was backing them. And then they say, because he was backing them, they murdered him. But there's a whole different ballgame going on, because Sweden was the first country to brand PKK as a terror organization. They were not before that. It was a liberation army. Sweden was the first nation ever that went out and did that. And then Turkey could get away with all kinds of horrible stuff, with killing so many of the Kurdish people and so on, backed by Sweden. But in the background, I'll tell you, there was a major multi-million krona deal in, it was a subway contract for ABB, owned by Wallenberg, where the whole thing with this, it was in Istanbul and Ankara, I think, a major building contract for ABB, that I believe there was a sort of like, if you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So they pointed very deliberately this group out so that they could get the terror stamp on that organization. And then Turkey said, thank you so much, and we will then give you the contract. And then we had Christer Pettersson, the perfect killer, the guy that he was perfect. You look at him, I mean, he's a scary looking guy. He just fits all. What they're looking for is somebody that will work in media, somebody that says weird things, that looks dangerous, that is, oh my God, it's him. Yeah, that's the guy. But he was absolutely innocent. So we go back to Gösta Söderström, my friend here, who was in the minority of one. He was the guy standing up saying, I arrived at this time. And that messed up the whole official narrative. Lindström, I told you before, he went back to bed, even though he... And then Hans Holmér was officially up in Borlänge, preparing for this Vasaloppet, the ski contest. But there were weird things going around him. So one of the private investigators, one of my friends, Sven Anér, he started looking into this and saying nobody saw him there. Nobody had heard of him. Nobody at this. So in the end, the police came forward with a receipt from the hotel. They said he stayed at this Scandic hotel in Borlänge. But when you see it, the date is wrong. It said here, the date of the assassination, that's when he paid. But officially, can you see that where the arrow is? It says 2/28, when it's actually, it was the 1st of March when it should have been ticked out.
I mean, I know this is maybe an awkward time to point this out, because you will probably say it later as well. But I just remember from all of the many times that you've been on the show trying to clear up the latest cases, whether it was in Paris, terror attacks, or here in Denmark, or wherever, and also the JFK case. They're always wrong. They're always making so many mistakes, and there are always so many obvious flaws and fails going on there when they're creating these major conspiracies. It's like it's not really very well. Oh, whoops! There I go. It's like it's not really very well thought out, huh?
But this is the thing. If you suddenly end up in a horrible situation that was not planned, and you are trying to get out of it, and in a case like this, the truth is the truth, But if you try to lie your way out, then the lies start falling over each other and start colliding with each other, and it just gets more and more messy. And also, just like you say, they're not very good at what they're doing. It's like at times I've almost felt like, come on, hire me. I'll know what to look out for.
You'll do it. You'll do it for them, because you're such an expert now.
I could be a lot better than they are when it comes to this. But anyway, Hans Holmér, the first investigator of this thing, who was officially in Borlänge, which is, I think, 700 kilometers from Stockholm, his bodyguard and driver, his name was Hans Dahlgren, he stepped forward some years later and said, I drove Holmér by the site 7 minutes after the shots were fired. That's what he said. And then he died. Shaboom. He was found dead in his kitchen, they said, because of that alcohol abuse. But the thing is, he did not drink alcohol.
But I mean, so the bodyguard of that Holmér said that he drove him 7 minutes after the Palme assassination, but Holmér was the one that was at this ski resort skiing or whatever he was doing, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, he was 700 kilometers away in another place where he was going for the Vasaloppet. It's the biggest ski competition in Sweden. It's massive. So,
but he wasn't. Apparently, he wasn't.
According to his driver, who really risked a lot when he stepped forward and exposing this whole thing.
And he also died. There's been a lot of deaths after this whole Palme case, huh? I mean, you're mentioning one after the other.
We've just got started here. So anyway, there's a group of right-wing police officers that have been pointed out by their colleagues and so on right away from day one. This Nazi gathering of police officers, right-wing, that came from a police station called Norrmalm, which is the central police station in Stockholm that was in charge of the center of Stockholm, but also the government building, all of the big buildings. It was under their control. And so it's a bit worrying, I would say, that to have a lot of Nazis there. There was like this, all of them were being brought in from the rest of Sweden. All of these right-wing elements were being brought in, and they had like meetings in the old town where they were doing Nazi Hitler salutes and singing old German soldier songs, and they were having like all kinds of things. After the murder happened, the night after, there were several of them that connected with each other and saluted the murder. You know, they were celebrating the death of Olof Palme and like these three dudes here. If you see, they're pretty hard, rough-looking individuals.
They don't look very nice, certainly.
And then you had one of Gösta Söderström's colleagues. His name was Gustav, also called Gösta Trysberg. He was the boss in Norrmalm. He was one of the higher officers there. And the years before the Olof Palme assassination, in the early 80s, he was getting really, really, really concerned about this gathering of right-wing elements in his own staff. You know, he was like, and he said it was unbelievable because they were untouchables. We couldn't do anything about them. They had like private meetings where we couldn't access, even though they were working for me, I couldn't access these rooms. And there were all of these Hitler salutes in the police station. He said he was getting really worried. And then he made reports to his higher ranking officers. And suddenly his, if I remember right, his police license was taken from him. They said that he had dropped it. They later found it in the safe of his boss, but also that they took away his license and also his gun. So he was without protection. He was feeling very, very paranoid at the end of his life. And then one day, this was a few years before the Palme assassination, but he was, like I said, the boss of the people that I'm going to point out here. His wife had broken her leg. They were living in a villa northeast of Stockholm, and so he just walked out to get the mail in the mailbox and then come back in. Didn't come back. So after a while, his wife got worried. She called a friend. They came over in a cab and they found him dead in the snow. So he had been stabbed 15 times. 15 times. Here you have the dead body, 15 stab wounds around the heart. through the ribs into the heart, the left lung, through the stomach, all kinds of like that.
And they still
Plus,
called it a suicide?
we're getting there. Yeah. So he died from heart and lung injuries, and also that these injuries were caused by most probably a knife. And then it says, and nothing talks against this being a suicide. And then he was hit in the face, and it said that most probably after the knife wounds. So you stab yourself 15 times, and then on the way down, you hit yourself in the face with a bat, and it's a suicide. I mean, I've even met his widow, who was devastated. She didn't understand why he killed himself. Well, he didn't. I mean,
she must have been asking questions, saying, being stabbed 15 times and hit in the head. Nobody can do that themselves. It's logic.
I can demonstrate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I need to rest a little bit. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And then smack myself in the head, fall backwards, land on top of the knife, and what the hell? And the guy
it's not funny, but to come up with such an explanation, saying that it was a suicide when you have the proof of what had actually happened, huh?
Lucas, I'm the only one who has exposed this case. No one, including his family, have even suspected that there were foul play involved. But it's like, when you look at it, it's like, come on. And then the guy who signed it, he's one of the top pathologists in Sweden, one of the top. He was the guy that took over after Milan Valverius and his wife committed suicide on the same day. He became number one.
It's amazing what can go down and what people will believe, right? If it comes from if it's a official narrative and an official statement by experts. I mean, this is extraordinary.
Then we have the first van, that police van that arrived to the location before or just after Police Commissioner Gösta Söderström arrived on location. Then came the first van. The thing is, this was van 3230. And at that time, like I said before, there was no alert that had gone out there. So how could they know about this 6 minutes before the alert actually went out? All of the people in this van came from these right-wing police officers that used to work under Trysberg, who just committed suicide with 15 stabs. Okay, they were right-wing. They went under the name of the Baseball League, because what they did was they were actually created by Hans Holmér, the number one murder investigator. He, a few years earlier, had created this anti-street violence group, as they were called. But what they did was they drove around in these police vans. They were dressed in civilian clothes with baseball caps and sometimes baseball bats. And their job was to clear the area from crap, just so they beat people right, left, and center. Some of these individuals had like 177 they had been reported about
criminal cases,
physical abuse, and they even killed a guy at the subway station in Stockholm while interrogating him. I mean, violent people. And we're going to see here, there are only a handful. There are about 8 to 10. And this very evening, they move into all the key positions around this assassination, all of them. The ambulance drivers, just this evening they changed. One guy just this evening was responsible for the radio communication traffic. Another guy just this evening only went in and was the guy who was sitting, receiving the phone calls when people rang in about this shooting, and then delaying, then sending out alerts to only vehicles where there were other members of the baseball police. And then there were the first van that arrived on site after Gösta Söderström. They were the ones that followed and chased the assassin officially. I mean, they're in all the key positions, all of them. What are the chances? What are the chances? And like this police van 3230, when the shots were fired, they were parked right on top of the stairs with perfect view down over the site where the shooting took place. And then boom, boom, the shots were fired. They just turned around and went all the way around and just came as the first vehicle. So the reason why they came at that time was because they saw the shots being fired, they drove around, and they came on location. But this is the thing that messes up with the time, these 6 minutes again. And this is one of the guys. He's called D in many documentaries because the reason they say that the van was up there was because he wanted to re-park his car up there. And that car was parked exactly where the last observation of the assassin was seen. And so they say that was because they belong to a police district south of central Stockholm. They should not be there at all. But they say the reason they were up there was because of moving this man. This is him today, really celebrating, nice guy. And this is the corner where the last observation of the murder. The house to the left is where another of his colleagues had an office. He also had a gun company, Strateg Protector. He was selling weapons and ammo and so on. And Claes Hedberg, this guy, he was right on the other side, the house to the right, very close. And this is exactly the few square meters where the last observation of the alleged shooter was. So the people, the first van that came, they were like, okay, they arrived to the location. Gösta Söderström, my friend, he said, he went that way, go get him. And they were like, no, but we haven't got any bulletproof vest or anything. They were just like not going for it. He said, come on, get your asses in gear, go. So they started running, but people that were there said that they were laughing and like behaving really odd. And one of them, Claes Hedberg, the guy that I just changed, to the left of the stairs is this escalator. And so he took that one instead. I ask you, if you are chasing an armed assassin, could you pick a worse place for cover? I mean, you are so open. If the guy is hiding up on top, it shows you he was not hiding at all. This witness, she was, this is not far from the murder site, and she was like, just minutes before, she looked out the window because she heard that there was like walkie-talkie communication type of thing. She looked out the window and there was this police car standing down there. The driver had his feet outside the door and like a walkie-talkie. And then he said, so over there. And then he jumped into the car and took off really high speed, crossed over a corner, like boom, 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 like this, and took off. But what she noticed was that in the back seat of this car, there was a lot of technical equipment there with flashing lights and stuff like that. She said she'd never seen it before. But she noticed that there were 3 numbers that she remembered on the rear mirror. These police cars had the number of the cars up there, and the ones she remembered was 520. And 520 is another car that comes right after the shooting. We had, these people were also involved in the baseball league. Christian Dalsgaard, he was actually a Dane, and his driver, Thomas Ekesäter. Okay, so they say that when they heard about the shooting, they thought that, okay, all of the other colleagues would go straight to the crime scene. But they said, so in that case, let's see if we can, like get to the killer if he's taking off in that direction. Maybe we can find him here instead, so we can stop him here. So they drove the back streets coming up, and this witness, Lars Jeppsson, was the only guy really that saw the killer run and then up the stairs and disappear. So he ran up. He waited a little bit because he was scared, and then he ran up the stairs. And so the report that went out there about the killer was that there were 1 or 2 people armed that was apparently leaving in the area in that direction. So he was running down the street, and then he saw this car 1520 coming very, very slowly, going towards him, towards the crime scene. And so he was like running, and the police car that was officially looking for a man, a shooter, did not stop him. They just passed him and drove up to the top of the stairs where they hooked up with the other colleagues. So he had to turn around and saying, listen, I think I saw him. So what did they do? Did they throw him in the car and say, okay, let's go around and see if you recognize the guy, you can point him out? No, they sent him back down to the crime scene where he was put in a van. He was sitting there for a long, long time. I think it was even an hour or so. And in the end, he just said, oh, fuck this. And he went home. And then he was only called for interrogation later on. This evening, there was also a TV crew that was driving around. They came not long after the assassination is said to have happened. So they saw the crime scene. There was a police officer there also. So they stopped and they said, hi there, what has happened? And the police officer said, don't worry about it. It's some immigrant kids, there's a stabbing. So the TV crew said, okay, fine. So they took off again. It's only the Prime Minister of Sweden. Here is another guy. He was this very evening he's one of the baseball gangs also. This very evening, he was in the one controlling the radio traffic. When people were calling in, it wasn't picked up, it wasn't picked up, it wasn't picked up. Then it was picked up and then delayed, and then sent out to this. This was the guy who was in charge of that. And then we have this guy, Östling, very, very key in all of these things. So Carl Gustav Östling he was like a Swedish James Bond, I would say. Right-wing, extreme right-wing guy. But he was a weapons specialist, and he was on a level where he was the guy that decided what sidearm the Swedish police force should have. I mean, that is way up there. He is a guy that has been pointed out over and over again by his colleagues saying, look, this guy. And he's the guy who had the apartment right where the very last observation of the alleged assassin disappeared. Later also, there was, due to another scandal, the Swedish custom services, they made a raid in his apartment that was filled with weapons, bazookas, German, all kinds of stuff, bayonets and stuff, including ammo of the identical to this very, very rare type of ammunition that was found on the location of the site. Then we have this guy, another Nazi also. He was a major, and he was the guy who was in charge of the radio traffic, including walkie-talkie traffic, this very night. He then, right after the assassination happened, he quit that job. I think maybe he went abroad. And then the guy that he was replaced by was called Gustav Östling, the weapon expert. These two people also, Thomas Pilz and Leif Tell, one of them was identified as by witnesses as one of the walkie-talkie guys near the crime scene. Leif Tell was identified as one that was standing outside the cinema, staring in, just like he was looking for something, into the lobby of the cinema. And then he was following the couple, the Palme couple, were walking towards where the shooting took place. They said they described him as the giant baby. And when you look at him, I can understand a little bit what they mean. Here he is today. And then we had Kenneth Lavrell, who was also close to the baseball gang. He was the guy in the ambulance that is said to have jumped from one ambulance into the other. There's also one thing, this in all of the documentaries nowadays, you hear that you hear this radio traffic and he's on his way to the hospital, and they said, then he's talking to the operator and he says, yeah, Palme. And they say, what? Olof Palme? Yeah, it's the prime minister shot. This is taken from the radio communication, but this is when he was on his way to the hospital, the ambulance. But if you listen in the background, no sirens. No sirens. And then this is also the guy that was then key in the alleged truck attack in Stockholm, where he was the guy that arranged for everything around the evacuation of the alleged victim and so on. Instead of driving them to hospital, which is just down the road, he set up like a center for 150 people on that street where everybody was taken in there instead of taken to the hospital.
And that truck attack was many years later, right? I do remember that. Many years. And I'll be happy to have one about that as well if you ever want. But anyway, the guy that was standing there with a gun on the corner of where the shooting then took place was recognized by two Finnish women. They say that... that's not a real picture, is it, Ole? That's a reconstruction, or what? Yeah,
reconstruction. Mm-hmm. But that's the real corner. And as you can see, he's got the cap, the whole shebang. But anyway, there were two Finnish women that came there. They were on their way home from... I think they had been to the cinema. They were on their way home and they were sort of like, it was getting late.
And did anybody actually see Olof Palme and his wife Lisbeth inside of the cinema watching this film, whatever film that was? And was there any symbolic significance in that film, by the way? That could also be just an interesting footnote.
That's a good point. I'm not sure. The film was called Bröderna Mozart, the Mozart brothers. I don't know, but yeah, loads of people saw him there. This was
So he was there. I mean, that was the real Olof Palme inside of the cinema,
for sure. But anyway, so this guy on the corner of Dekorima, he goes under the name of the Dekorima man because of exactly this corner, this art shop. And so these two girls were on their way home, and one of them recognized this guy as a Finnish-speaking guy from that she recognized from a gym north of Stockholm. And so she went up to him just to ask what time it is. So she asked in Finnish, like "Mitti kello," blah, blah, whatever it is in Finnish, I don't know. And the guy was standing like with his hands crossed over his chest like this. And when she asked, suddenly she heard like, and then "they're coming." Somebody said in Finnish, "they're coming." And then he said, "I've been recognized. What should I do?" And in Finnish, they answered, "just do what you have to do." And so these two girls were like, whoa, they thought maybe it's a drug deal or something going down. They had no idea that Palme was approaching or anything like that. So they took off. And then they went on the other side of the street. They started walking towards the subway, and then they heard boom, boom. And then the very next day, they read in the newspaper that Palme had been murdered. So they kept quiet for years and years because they were terrified. And then a friend of mine, Olle Alsen from a major newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, he heard of these two and interviewed them. And then what they told him was that he had been standing like this, and when they heard the walkie-talkie thing, he pulled out like a walkie-talkie in his left hand. But the woman said that she saw that he had a gun in the right hand, that he was standing like this with both like that. Okay, so the guy that they recognized was this guy, Antti Avsan, who is now a lawyer. No, he's a...
Vad är det civilutskottet?
He is a judge in the High Court. He's also a top politician for the moderate party. It's like, what? And he's talking about youth violence and stuff like that. I was like, really? Maybe you should answer a question or two. He was also the last guy that was seen together with a prostitute called Katarina da Coste, who was then found later mutilated. She was chopped up and into plastic bags and found very close to this coroner center where Olof Palme's body was also taken. This is way before, but I just find it, I can't point at him. I just find it very odd that he is the very last person being seen with her before this happened. And also, there's so many different connections in bizarre ways into other areas. Then afterwards, in 87, there was a very mysterious gun club started. And in this gun club, very, very odd individuals. You had Per Arvidsson. He was the guy that identified the bullets that was found. The only thing was he identified it on Saturday, and one of the bullets were first found on Sunday morning. Go figure. He was also the very same guy that when this whole shooting at Krudtunnan in Denmark, when that happened, a friend of mine was pointing out that the door had been open to this book cafe. This was in January of 2015. And the bullet holes didn't match, even though the door had been open. So they should have sort of like been matching. He pointed out, he sent in it to a Swedish, I think, Channel 2 in Denmark.
And we did a really good show together, you and I, when that had just happened in 2015. People can see that also on our channel. Yeah.
And then after that, the TV news, they interviewed the police also. And so the police, the Danish police, called for this very same guy, Per Arvidsson, as an expert. This is many years later, called him in, and he came up and said, well, the problem is that the ammunition of the Danish police is not powerful enough, so it cannot go through more than one glass window at the same time. It's like, what? That is absolute bullshit. But so they use that as an excuse to amp up the power of the guns at the Danish police. When you look at it, it's just not true. I mean, come on, it wasn't bulletproof glass. It was a normal glass window. You can almost do that with an air gun, that a powerful air gun, you can pop 2 windows. So absolute bullshit. Then you have the second one, Antti Avsan, the Dekorima man. Then you have Sonny Björk, the guy up top left. He's the weapon expert in the Palme assassination. So here we have somebody who has been pointed out as part of the assassination, and you have the gun expert of the investigation. Then you have Claes Hedberg, who was the guy that with the car up there from the baseball gang that came as the first van. Then you have Ingmar Grundborg. He was the guy who was in charge of the whole telecommunication radio traffic that night. Ulf Helin was the guy who was sitting with directing the calls after the shots. Then you have a couple of these people that are way up high military, but in psychological warfare, false flag operations, and one is an expert on Russia. And then you have Östling also, the guy, the Swedish James Bond. Very odd, to say the least. And here's another of these baseball gangs. He was one of them. He was later, after the assassination, Hans Holmér suddenly had the very same people as his bodyguards. People that were pointed out as being part of the assassination was suddenly his bodyguard. And his girlfriend died under mysterious circumstances. So the big question is, here we come. Is Mr. Dammegård a tinfoil hat or not? A lone nut or a coup d'etat in slow motion? And tinfoil hat or truth seeker? I'm just showing here, here's a judge from the War Tribune in Kuala Lumpur. Ole Dammegård is one of the most extraordinary experts on assassinations. Boom. You got Chip Tatum, he was the commander of George Bush Sr.'s ultra-secret hit team Pegasus. Ole Dammegård was one of the absolute best in his areas of expertise. Professor Robert Harkavy, former war games advisor from the Pentagon. He's my hero. Jim Fetzer, former military and professor. Worldwide, Ole Dammegård is a world-class expert. Chief FBI consultant Alan J. Sellerin, also backing me. I'm not saying this to polish my halo. I'm just saying that what I'm about to put forward is quite extraordinary. And so I just want to say there's some heavyweights backing me. On my website, lightonconspiracies.com, you can see there's a text ticker at the top with a lot of people from around the world, inside the CIA, FBI, NSA, Pentagon, many different areas that are backing me. Okay, so
you've also done so much research, and now you're showing this autographed photo of Shirley MacLaine, who was involved in Olof Palme, obviously. Can you tell us why or how she got involved with him? And I think it was also on a romantic level, wasn't it, secretly?
God, yeah, as romantic as you can get. It was they had a really passionate relationship. There's I think it's what was his David Frost. I think it was David Frost. He was like a legendary journalist. And
he was an interviewer, for many years.
I think it's Shirley MacLaine and Olof Palme is being interviewed by him. And you can see, I mean, there's sparks, especially from Shirley's side, towards him. It's like they were not trying to hide it.
Yeah, but how did they get to know each other? I mean, it's the most unusual combination. I mean, some people do say, I have heard that people that have been writing about mind-controlled victims also in Hollywood, that maybe Shirley MacLaine was one of them or a part of it, but that we don't know, of course, for sure, and we can't substantiate that she was also she was very much involved in the spiritual writing and going into the, let's say, the spiritual stuff of the occult. But I mean, why was she involved with Olof Palme? It's incredibly unusual.
No, not really. I mean, they were both well-known celebrities. I mean, Olof Palme was a heavyweight. Shirley MacLaine was a heavyweight. I don't know if that was the first time they met in that studio. I don't know. I can only say that in her books, I'm sure that maybe in her books that she reveals how they met. I don't know, but they had an affair that was on and off. So we come here now to chapter 2. The first part here, I've just said, there's a lot of weird things. And I've only been scratching on the surface. In my book, Coup d'etat in slow motion, it is there. Boom, 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 boom. Extremely detailed, extremely. So please remember the chief investigator, the police chief, Hans Holmér, he said not long after this assassination, he said, if the real truth is ever revealed, it will shake Sweden in its foundation. What?
And probably also other countries and all around the world.
But what does that mean? For one thing, it means that he knows the real truth. Otherwise, he couldn't say it. And what would shake Sweden in its foundation? That is something heavyweight, And also, we had an ambassador who was also key in this whole thing. His name was Carl Lidbom. He said there was this dinner, I think, for Nelson Mandela, and Lisbeth Palme was there as well. And then he said, it's best for everyone involved that the real truth never gets revealed. Once again, how can you say anything like that if you don't know the real truth? And best for everyone involved that the real truth never gets revealed. What does that mean?
It means that you, Ole Dammegård, is going to reveal all of it for us, and we're very excited.
I'm going to do my best. And I'm saying this is like putting together a giant jigsaw that's taken me 30 years. But the thing with this jigsaw is that all the pieces look the same. You can put them together in many different ways and they look like they fit, but there's only one truth. So like I said before, many people are doubting me in this area. I can only say that I put in more than most, if not anyone. I mean, I was there from day one. And also it's the collection of all of the info I got from so many other heavyweight researchers during these years that are now dead or have been killed or murdered or whatever. So this is what I'm trying to build. There's still question marks. There's still so, but I'm just saying I have done my best so far. So Olof Palme, who was Olof Palme? He was officially this the friend, social democrat politician, a friend of the poor people's friend, the guy that took care of the minorities, that took care of many different areas. But I tell you, over the years, when I've been looking into it, what I see is a Trojan horse, because he was a Bilderberger. He was involved with all kinds of elements on a really high level. And just before his death, he was considered the next head of the United Nations, the General Secretary General.
Yes, and it's very interesting that there's actually even a whole summit, a climate change summit that already happened back in, I think, in 1972 or 73, where he was addressing the United Nations, I believe, and he was there part of it. I was wondering if not only that he was a Bilderberger, but maybe he was also part of the whole Club of Rome thing that initiated that whole climate agenda.
As far as I know, he was a member of the Club of Rome. I might be wrong. I mean, it's been so many years. As far as I know, he was not a lightweight. This was a heavyweight. I mean, on a completely different level than other Swedish politicians and so on. But he came from a very odd background. The Palme family is a very, very powerful family in Sweden. There's a few families that are very, very powerful, that used to be very powerful. Now, when you say Palme, everybody thinks of Olof Palme, but he came from like one of these power institutions, like of families. His first jobs was in military intelligence. He was as a young individual, and he was some of the first projects he ever did in the Swedish military has now been exposed as it was financed by the CIA, because Sweden was very much involved with the US during many, many years. This whole bullshit about Sweden, should you be part of NATO or not? Now, as far as I know, they've been member of NATO since 1954. It's just that it has not been on the paper. Once again, we're being shown one thing and it's a different thing underneath. So he had very, very weird things. Also, his family had very, very weird ties. You had like one of his uncles were on he was being accused of crimes against humanity at the Nuremberg trials. They were deeply involved in IG Farben, also the Wallenbergs. He had people like Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA, came visited them. Hermann Göring was another person who was in his house, who was married to the chief of the German Luftwaffe, who was also married to a Swedish woman and lived just down the road. They had a specific family called Palme Dutt, that were the people that created the Communist Party in India. And you had connections with the Guy Burgess, the whole thing, this spy cell in England. I mean, it's just like, what is this? Very, very odd, you know? And then he came from a right-wing family that came from the East, especially on his mother's side. And he was educated in the US, which once again, I put a big question mark, what type of education was that? And it said that he was a right wing, just like the rest of his family. But then when he was in the US, he hitchhiked in the southern parts of, Georgia and these type of poor states. And he suddenly came to the realization, oh my God, I'm a social democrat. So he changed overnight from being right wing to social democrat, which is left. And so when he came home, I was like, he spoke to a close friend, and he said, listen, it might be a bit confusing, but I have been offered to make a much better career if I choose this one. So don't worry about it. It's just that it's part of my career.
Well, a lot of people who are heads of states and movers and shakers and those who become presidents and prime ministers, they're all part of the Bilderberg Group and other secret societies, and they're often part of that group, the Bilderberg Group. Oh my God, this keeps falling out of my ear today. But they're all part of that years or a few years before they're actually are being put in that position of power. So maybe Palme was also part of the Bilderberg Group before that, and then it was decided that he had to become a social democrat or he had to play that particular part. What are your thoughts on that?
He wasn't a Bilderberg at that time, but he was being primed for something very odd, I think. And so he went in under the wings of Tage Erlander, who was the Swedish prime minister, who was a social democrat. And people around him were like, what the hell, is Palme a social democrat? I mean, people were really surprised around it. But Tage Erlander, he put him under his wings, and then Olof Palme's career just went straight up. He came very, very young into this whole sphere. And also, he was then part of creating Gladio, the Stay Behind Ghost Army movement in Sweden, involved with all kinds of strange individuals. And like I say, he was a Bilderberg, but not on a low level. He was the guy that invited to Sweden several times. He was the opening speaker. He was part of a lot international, like really, really, really heavy stuff, But what I think happened, because in, I believe it was 1972, nobody stood up against the US. Nobody, And then suddenly this politician, completely unknown politician, Olof Palme, walked side by side with the ambassador of Vietnam in a this big parade. It made headlines all over the world, because it's like, what? And once again, Swedes are not famous for being courageous. So it was like, what the hell? And he was standing up against the US, and he kept speaking out. He made some super, super heavy statements, like after the bombings of Hanoi and stuff like that, where he was talking about war crimes so hard, so spot on, amazing, absolutely amazing. But now when you read books of people from that time, their memoirs and so on, like one of them said that right after this TV interview, he went straight to the to the Wallenberg family and said, please don't worry, it's business as usual. I had to do that. It's part of a strategic move here. So don't worry, we just move on as exactly like before. But what that did was it opened the door to many, many, many so-called the enemy. You had the US, and then on the enemy line, they had the ANC in South Africa. They had Yasser Arafat and the PLO, the Palestinian movement. You had Fidel Castro and so on. And suddenly he was welcomed everywhere, in through the back door, like a Trojan horse. And
But
he
if
had
you
the,
actually say that he was trained in America, he was probably a CIA agent, and then he was put in that position to infiltrate all of these other well, dictators and leaders that you're talking about here. This is quite extraordinary.
that's my take. I'm speculating now. I don't know that education. I can't prove that that was it. But he had already been contracted or financed by the CIA in Sweden while working at the military intelligence, at the so-called Försvarsstaben. He was so. But in my world, it's like, whoa, 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 naughty boy. Something is going on here.
Red flags coming up here, huh?
In my, it's like beep, 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 you know. And then he was welcomed in a way that no one else, I mean, everybody else was kept out from the Sandinist government, from PLO, from Cuba. Instead, he was being welcomed as a hero. You see the psyop, and Fidel Castro was smoking cigars with him, and Yasser Arafat, no, not Arafat. Yeah, Yasser Arafat, these type of individuals, that was the enemy. He got close to them like this. I think we're looking at like a double agent, at least.
Mm-hmm,
Okay,
definitely, definitely. It appears that way, or it could be like that, huh?
I can only say I can't prove it, but when you start seeing like this, okay, so on the day that he died, the last people that he phoned that day were all Bilderbergers, and there's only a handful in Sweden. So it's like, that is quite extraordinary. You got Emma Rothschild to the left, who lived not far from him in the old town of Stockholm.
Oh, she was a Swede who was part of the Rothschild family, or what? Or was she from another country?
She's not Swedish, as far as I know, but it is claimed from a very well-known secret. Once again, I can't prove it, but that Olof Palme had an illegitimate child with her. It's like people on the inner circle knows it. It's like when they've told me, it's like, what's the big secret? I said, I've never heard of it. Well, we do. Anyway, so also, which is interesting now, is that Olof Palme's youngest son today, as far as I know, is living in her house in Gamla Stan.
Do we know what her child looks like? I mean, maybe he resembles Olof Palme a bit, maybe.
I don't know. I've been away from Sweden too long, so I don't know.
But it's interesting that it's a Rothschild lady, huh? Part of that family.
It's like when you move around in these circles, they are high up there. Is it a coincidence? Sometimes, but it's like you play with like-minded, you play with like that. Then one of the last phone calls he made was to Sven Asplin, number 3 here, who was deeply involved in creating the Stay Behind movement in Sweden, the Gladio Ghost Army Network. And the Ghost Army Gladio Network headquarters was in exactly the same building as he was murdered outside. I mean, we're talking like 5 meters. That's how close it was to Stay Behind's headquarters. Coincidence? I think not. And then while he was inside the cinema, he apparently bumped into an acquaintance, Björn Rosengren, down to the right. And they said, hello, how are you? And all of these things. Also a Bilderberg member. So you got like the last boom, 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 Bilderbergers. So
yeah, but because one question that I think the audience definitely would have, and I certainly also have, is that if you wanted to stage something like this, and it's obviously very complicated, and you haven't even told us the whole thing yet, but why stage that on an open street? I mean, the main street in the old town of Stockholm, where bystanders and people that are passing by, regular people, could see and discover this. I mean, it's quite risky, isn't it, if it's not real?
We're coming to that. It's when you look at the date, it was the 28th of February. That was the end of the so-called sportlov, the winter holidays, meaning that most of people in Stockholm were out skiing in the north of Sweden or wherever. So that is the day that you should pick if you wanted a deserted Stockholm. It's after 11 o'clock. It was cold. It was windy. The lights at the crime on top above the crime scene were not working, so it was dark. Not a lot of people moving around. So and also I'm going to come to that also. But when you look at many of these things, when they happen on a Friday. The reason for that, if I'm correct, is you got the Kennedy assassination, you got the truck attack, you got this assassination, many others. When I start seeing a pattern, I start questioning. So that's why I started looking into it. And when you look at the reason for that, I think, is that you have this when somebody knows that something major is going to happen. If you know it, you have insider information, you can put stock options and on the stock market, all kinds of financial stuff like that. It builds up. Oh, it's like this. And then right before the bomb explodes or the shot is fired, it goes, whoa, and boom, then it happens. How could they know? How could they know if they weren't in the know? So what happens then is, since it's a Friday, they close down the stock market because we are so concerned for the survivors and the families and whatever. So flag down, half, boom, like that. And then they got Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes Monday to clear the tracks, to get rid of the tracks, all of these transactions that was done right before it happened. They managed to get that now. And then they open on Monday or Tuesday up with a flag again and back to business. And they've just made an absolute killing, literally. So that is why I believe that it's done on Fridays. So the final solution, what actually happened? And here, when I used to say this, it was like many years people were looking at me like, yeah, right, tinfoil hat, like this. But now more and more people from the inside are stepping forward saying that I am right. So in the early 80s, he died 86. In the early 80s, he had this strange disease that nobody could understand what was going on, and he went on all kinds of different types of tests, and he went to various institutes, and nobody knew what it was until in 1985. Rock Hudson, and he was the first, the Hollywood star. He was the first major one that stepped forward and said, "Very sorry, you didn't even know I was gay, but I've got HIV," and he died from AIDS as well. In those days, it was called the gay plague. It was connected with such incredible shame, and officially you could only receive it through gay sex. Then later came, it could be blood, blood transfusions and all kinds of that. But in the first years, it was gay.
Yeah, but they did say that the HIV virus came from Africa. And maybe it's something related to monkeys. And let's not even picture how that could be transferred.
Well, I tell you, it came from a laboratory. It was Dr. Robert Gallo and a team that got a contract. They were paid about $100,000 to create a bioweapon that went under the name of AIDS.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
And then it was transferred. It was implemented through hepatitis B, where they were driving around giving out for free to the gay community in San Francisco, to different mental institutions, and in in New York, different areas, where they started injecting them. And then when this whole thing started erupting, then they were selling extremely expensive drugs that were killing the victims.
Exactly. It was to create a scare, right? To say that this is a gay disease, a gay plague.
Yeah. So let's say it lightly. Gay plague, not the best thing to be labeled with in those days. But it was.
And do we
it was-
know, I must ask you this, do we know that Olof Palme was diagnosed with HIV?
It is now more and more people from the inside are stepping forward saying, yes, he had AIDS or he had HIV. There's one guy here recently. I mean, these are like golden nuggets for me to get confirmation instead of just claiming stuff. Like one person, his name was or is Tage Tuvheden. He worked in the laboratories for Tetra Pak, Tetra Pak, the milk cartons, that a Swedish guy called Hans Rausing was the inventor of this. It's all over the world. So they had very advanced laboratories to make absolutely sure, that the milk would be okay. And so he was one of the people that were approached to see if they could discreetly try and find out what is going on with Olof Palme. And so him and also several other people now are stepping forward saying, yes, it was not. The thing is, they didn't know what it was. They did not know what it was.
But apparently he felt sick and went to get some tests or something.
Yes, that he did. That is proven. And then in 1985, this is one of his closest friend, Ebbe Carlsson, who used to share his hotel room and stuff like that, because Olof Palme was bisexual. He died from AIDS. And this was the best friend of Hans Holmér, the head investigator, who they shared an apartment also after he got divorced. He died from AIDS. I mean, the whole thing in the center of this, AIDS. So, so it seems like that at one point they found out, oh my God, he is HIV positive. And with a disease like that, just like you can see on the face of his friend here to the right, it's a very dramatic change in the facial structure and everything like that. It's very obvious that it's not any other case, and especially in those days where you could not hide it. I mean, you couldn't say.
Yeah, but the top elitists who were involved with him, and he was in all of those circles, they must have known that HIV would only be triggered and become the disease AIDS that people would die from the medicine that they received that actually killed them, right? Because people don't die from AIDS today, even if they are diagnosed with the HIV virus.
Absolutely not. These are very high level, top secret operations. And it's only because of geeks like this one who spend like 30, 40 years, suddenly it's obvious. Yes, it was like that. It was in a laboratory. Yes, of course, it's a state bomb. There you go. No, it took like 25 years of digging really deep into this has been proven, So,
but certainly for you to understand, but I mean, I'm just saying that those people who were in the know about the medicine were the one that triggered the so-called HIV disease. No, the AIDS disease must have known that they should not give Olof Palme that medicine that could trigger that, even if he was, as you speculate, of course, or maybe no, if he was diagnosed with HIV.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. There's also this whole thing if you start seeing that there's this possibility that it was not transferred through sex, but that it was transferred through the injections. In that case, what happened to Olof Palme? Was he targeted? What happened there?
Maybe he was compromised, yes, and had some kind of an injection. That's also an interesting point, huh?
I don't know. I just know that this was the situation in 1984, 5. But it seems like he was aware of that he was having a deadly disease from 1982 up until his assassination.
But do you think that they knew, all of them, they probably did know, that he was bisexual, and maybe they wanted to threaten him, saying, if you don't do this or that, then we'll make it public, we'll make it known, and maybe in that way they could put him in line. Do you think?
I don't know, Lucas. I don't know. I don't know. What I'm saying is that he had this virus thing, and in those days, according to Torger Tuvheden and the other people in the laboratory, they didn't know what it was. It was completely new in the world. It was a whole different thing, whole different symptoms, whole different thing. And then it came to a point where it was diagnosed. And so suddenly Olof Palme was in a terrible situation because he was considered the next Secretary General of the United Nations. His career, his whole life, everything was built on this image of him being this perfect guy, this amazing individual who was standing up for the weak and who was, he was legendary in many countries. And then this happened. And so they had a series of meetings. In these top secret meetings, I believe Hans Holmér, the chief investigator was there. We had Ebbe Carlsson, his close friend, who was also very connected to this Gladio network. I think he was working from out of Brussels. It was something called IBO3, where this guy, he was officially a book publisher, but he was like moving around, giving prime ministers order and all kinds of stuff, really. And he used to travel around with Olof Palme. He was in his office with his feet up in the sofa. There were all kinds of weird stuff about him. He was there. Then
so they all had affairs together, or what?
That is what I believe. That is what I believe. Then we have Carl Gustav Östling, the weapon expert, also a guy that could be trusted. He was sort of the head of the baseball gang. Carl Lidbom, the ambassador, but also the advisor to many, many top politicians. He had been the advisor to Olof Palme as well. He is a fixer. He was a fixer, Any problem, they called him in. He was like he was called a buffalo, He was rough, like a mob type of guy, but could get things fixed. And then his friend Bernd Carlsson, who was a very close associate to Olof Palme, who was also the guy who later got blown up in the so-called Lockerbie accident. This Lockerbie terror attack, this plane that exploded over Scotland and was blamed on Libya. Absolutely not. I have here, it was the explosives was placed in a small little tape recorder in his luggage. And he was just about to expose what had happened here with Olof Palme when he was blown up.
Oh.
Then we had Harry Schein, a close family friend to Olof Palme, also the director of the Swedish Film Institute. So they were in a situation like, what are we going to do? Either it's just a matter of time before this HIV thing will be apparent. We can't hide it anymore. You've had it like for 3-4 years. We can't hide it anymore. It's just a matter of time. So it's like Carl Lidbom, the advisor. I think he was the guy that came up with the idea. He said either that, like, two options. Either option one, you do the so-called right thing. You call for an international press conference. You said, I have had gay sex. I'm infected with HIV. I'm very sorry. I didn't mean it. But otherwise than that, thank you and goodbye. Meaning that your name, Olof Palme, would forever have this branded thing, gay plague in the forehead. Your family, everything would be destroyed. The reputation of the Swedish Social Democrat Party destroyed. All of these international things with the Bilderberg, all of that was connected to you would be affected in a very negative way. Option number two. He said, if you noticed, there's a very special pattern of people that could be compromised in different ways, but once they died, if they died in a very specific way, they became legends overnight. Suddenly their name would be forever in neon lights. You have like JFK, MLK, these type of individuals that before, when they were alive, they could be criticized, they could be all of these things, but once the bullet entered their head, boom, a legend was created. So Carl Lidbom came up with Option one, do the right thing. Option two, we can stage an assassination here. What we'll do is we have a double, we stage it, we control all the inner circle, just like the baseball gang, all of the inner thing. We make it look like an assassination, but actually you're being replaced by a double. You're being taken out the back and then flown in a private jet down to the south of Europe, where you will be able to stay with some of the elite in their castles, have a life in luxury, get the absolute best treatments you can get for money. You can have your mistresses, you can have Shirley coming down, your family can come and visit you, everything. We need a little operation, you know, your nose is too prominent, and maybe, contact lenses, colored contact lenses, and a wig, boom, that's it. And you can live like that. Option
or maybe
one.
there's an Epstein kind of island where they can all go. I mean, that's also what some people are saying, that it's not even part of some of the countries.
Oh, sure. This is 1986. A lot of things have happened since then, where it's been more and more concentrated to bigger and bigger network. But this is, as far as I know, what happened. So what they did was to, once Olof Palme had decided to go for that, and really when you think of it, I can't really blame him, because it's like absolute disaster, including for the people you love, your family, or a legend where they would be worshipped and held high and their careers would blossom, and my name, Olof Palme, will forever be this legend. Gay plague, legend. So,
but can I also just speculate one more time here, Ola, because, you know, one thing is that maybe he could have been labeled with the gay plague, which turned that everybody got to know as HIV and all of that. But if we suppose that's one option, and then he of course chose the other one to become a legend overnight, and they staged the whole thing. You're gonna explain how they did that and everyone who was involved. But what if he was trying to step out of line and they didn't want him to do that? If he wanted to go in another direction than what the New World Order wanted him to do, and then they gave him the option, and maybe they threatened to expose that he was also bisexual and all of that, but maybe he didn't have the HIV disease. But you say that you have evidence of that, but there could maybe also be a third option, saying that they compromised him and then gave him the choice. How does that resonate with you? Could that be something?
Of course, but I have only just started, because I'm coming into these areas that will then exclude the options you're saying. Oh. But it would be the explanation to what came to a situation where exactly this thing happened. So I'm not the only one who have, over the years, I put an image of Claes Hedberg here also. I met him. My book was published in 2005. He came 15, something like that. I met him on one of my tours in Sweden when I was talking about this whole thing. But there are other people also. There was the first book I've ever read that had anything to do with this, and where I just felt that is just bizarre, was a book called Mordet en rövarhistoria, the murder, a fairy tale type of thing, where it's a children's book. It was published in 1989, or it's labeled a children's book, but in it he describes exactly this scenario. It's just that when you just have to change the names, and it's so like, oh my god. So in 1989, when I found this book, I looked this guy up and I approached him. He signed the book, and then I asked, has this to do with the Olof Palme assassination? He got completely pale and just turned around and more or less ran away.
He didn't want to answer you or go into that talk or that discussion with you.
No, he was terrified. And there's a reason. I mean, when you start seeing how many dead bodies that are piling up, there's a reason. But there was also another book called the secret scenario of the Palme murder, who is written by a guy that worked very close to Carl Lidbom, the advisor, the Buffalo. He was working at the embassy in Paris when this happened, and he started seeing very, very odd things going on. He, from the inside, close to Carl Lidbom, like, what the hell? It didn't make any sense whatsoever. So he started digging into this from 1986 and onwards and found the exact same thing. So one of the things here, what they said was like, when we look at the autopsy report, one is actually covered open. And one of the things that is covered open is the length of the guy. You know, so one of the things that they covered over was the height of this body. And also when the body came in, the nurses, that the two that has been interviewed, they came from what they call the Iron Gang. That sounds very disciplined to me as well. The Iron Gang that was receiving the body. One of the nurses said that she didn't even recognize Palme, even after it was pointed out to her that it was Olof Palme. She said, and the other nurse said that he was much taller than I would have imagined. He was only 173, you know, and here, so this is one of the things I think, why would they black it out like that?
Somebody died, obviously, and I think you're getting to that as well. But it wasn't just that it was staged and he didn't die and it didn't happen there. Somebody died, right? And was at that morgue.
Yeah, and also here you can see when it comes to the autopsy report, can you see the signatures are different? Can you see the J is different? The A, even though it's it should be the same autopsy report. So that has also been manipulated. Once again, my book is Statskupp in slow motion. If you're interested, it's available on Amazon, or Coup d'etat in slow motion if you prefer English. So, so this is where it starts getting complicated, because Olof Palme was in a situation where they needed to stage an assassination, a fake assassination, which they could very easily do if they used, for instance, the members of the baseball gang. They could just say, you're going to be the shooter, you're going to be that, you're going to be that. But then if you think about nerds like myself, I could very easily track them down, and that could cause a massive scandal if it was found out that he had actually been part of ordering his own assassination, you know, taking the whole world for a massive ride, something that could shake Sweden in its foundation, and the international reputation could be destroyed. This beautiful facade, like, this is quite major. So what Olof Palme started doing was, once he accepted that this is what we're going to do, he was then ordered to start the legend Olof Palme, get rid of all the evidence, get rid of all the dirt. And so suddenly, from being loyal to the elite, he overnight started behaving very, very strange, because it's only this handful of people that knows the inner circle. They know what's going on. The other people do not. And so the people that he was loyal to up to then, the Bilderberg group, the Wallenberg, all of these power structure, powerhouses in the world, suddenly started noticing, what the hell is up with Palme? He was starting to behave really odd, you know, in many different ways. I tell you, he was sitting at night just with a document shredder, just he started stopping like big gunpowder deliveries down to East Germany that was headed towards the Iran-Iraq war, where he was actually a peace negotiator at the same time. You know, he was involved in several different major weapon deals, and where he stopped it, he was part of creating a nuclear power-free zone for Scandinavia, which would mean that American submarines, atomic power-driven submarines, could not enter into the Baltic Sea. He started really messing with these things, and people that were working close to him at the government, they said that sometimes he was sitting crying, other times he was like, almost like too happy. And one time he was.
So he was in a way going against the elite. What I just said before, he wasn't just playing by the rules in a way.
Exactly. But here comes why, because he's now suddenly he changed direction completely. This is the thing that is causing a lot of problems, because people around him are starting to see him as a traitor. He was just about to go to Moscow in March, meeting with Gorbachev. So the military in Sweden and the marine in Sweden and other places were like, oh my God, he's going to sell Sweden. He's going to sell us out to the Russians. People were freaking out because he was behaving so strangely while creating the legend. You see, so his behavior overnight, boom, boom. And he started, really in a major way, absolutely messing things up for the big powers that he had been loyal to up to then. So they were starting to freak out. But anyway, let's go back to the fake assassination. So what they came up with, or they soon realized that if we have a hit team that are aware of that it's a fake assassination, we can have a major problem with with blackmail afterwards, because this is a super secret. So anyone who is involved can just say, pay me $5 billion or I'll tell, So they were like, how are we going to do this? And what the end result was that they hired a real hit team, but where I'm going to come to how that was supposed to go down. So they went through a contact they had in South Africa. His name is Major Craig Williamson, who at a place west of Johannesburg called Daisy Farm. It was a torture center where they tortured and killed a lot of ANC members and stuff like that. This man to the right, Dirk Coetzee, he leaked out information saying that they were sitting there for about 3 months after they received the contract of killing Olof Palme, that they were sitting there like schoolboys going through the different stages of how to do it. So Craig Williamson, this guy who went under the name of Super Spy Craig Williamson, he had infiltrated the Social Democrat Party years earlier. It was officially said that he was an ANC member. He was not at all. He was South African military, and he had managed to play a double game and be received as a hero because he had been tortured for the rights of black and whatever. So he was welcomed in first Holland and then Sweden as the superhero, because Sweden was backing, especially Olof Palme was backing the so-called ANC. And so during the time that he was in Stockholm, he moved his way up in the Social Democrat corridors of power. And in the end, he was even writing speeches for possibly Olof Palme, but people very, very close at that level speeches. He was also involved in, because he came to the knowing of when Sweden was sending aid, financial aid to ANC, he interfered with it and made sure that the South African intelligence services were the ones receiving the money. So Sweden sent money to ANC, but it ended up in black ops under this whole thing. Really quite advanced. Then he was exposed, and he managed to escape just before he got caught and went back to South Africa and was hailed as a hero. He was like that. So he was working at this torture center, and also they had death squads they were in different places, Black Plus and this Daisy Farm, but they were horrible. Very, very brutal, very, very brutal. So he was the guy, because he knew Stockholm, he knew the Social Democrat headquarters, he knew Rosenbad, the government building, he knew it from the inside. So he would be the perfect guy to do it. And he hated Palme. He absolutely hated him. So the contract was sent to him, and then he put together a hit team by other different people, among others, Anthony White, a guy from Rhodesia, now living in Mozambique, who's he looks a lot like the drawing that woman did that night. And when confronted many years later by a newspaper from Sweden saying, "What about this drawing?" he said, "I didn't know I was that handsome." Then you had Peter Castleton. There was a whole bunch where he took them from different groups. You had one German, but he was a South African agent in Germany, Franz Esser. He was the guy that received the hit team once they moved from South Africa. They flew with Luxair to Luxembourg, and then he picked them up in a Winnebago, drove them up through Germany, Denmark, and then into Sweden, where they went up north of Stockholm, and they were hidden and moved around by the baseball gang, and also I think parts of Stay Behind as well, so that they were being fed, they were being housed, they had housing, they had weapons, they had everything they needed, but they kept moving them around so that neighbors wouldn't suspect anything. Another guy in this hit team was a Norwegian guy called Ole Christian Olstad, a soldier of fortune who was in this assassination as well. Another guy, Heine Hümann, also a German, but boss agent, who was part of several assassinations, including one in Paris, a woman called Dulcie September. He was also one of the people in this hit team. This is the woman they murdered in Paris. And so while they were being moved to Sweden, and what they did, they started mapping the movements of the target. So the whole idea was to get a real hit team in, but the person that would deliver the weapons to them was Carl Gustav Östling, the Swedish James Bond. And the idea was that at the very last minute, he would exchange the ammo to blanks, so that the people in the hit team would believe that it was a real hit, so that they could not blackmail or anything like that. They would then be helped out. They would become absolute untouchables that couldn't be sentenced for everything. This is also a standard on that level of assassins, that they cannot be persecuted or anything, because then the risk is that they will reveal other stuff. But while all of these things happened, you had several people in Sweden that were being approached as the assassin. Like this man, Kenneth Nailberg, he was offered 1 million Swedish krona to do the shooting. He has stepped forward saying that. And the guy that approached him, asking him, was Tommy Lindström, the guy who, the birthday thing with the ice hockey club. It was his informant. He was the guy that approached Kenneth Nailberg if he would do the hit. And then Milan Heidenreich, this Milan that did the thing, once this came out, boom, he died in a single traffic accident on a highway. There was only one vehicle involved, and it just whoosh, and dead, boom. So the building where the assassination took place, with the Dekorima corner, is the Swedish Stay Behind headquarters, was for many years. This is an insurance company called Skandia, but it used to be named Thule, and it was started by Olof Palme's grandfather on his father's side. Then, if you notice Thule, you got Thule Gesellschaft, the occult Nazi variation. You also got Thule Air Force Base on Greenland, a super secret spy base up on the northwest coast of Greenland, and then this company. So when the connections with these other things happened, they changed the name to Skandia. But it was in this house where former director of the CIA, William Colby, who was an ambassador at the time, together with Reinhard Gehlen, the guy to the right here, who was a super advanced military intelligence officer, who was taken out from Germany after the Second World War through Operation Paperclip, and then he was part of changing the OSS into the CIA and also building up the whole Gladio network. Like William Colby, he was involved in creating Gladio or Stay Behind in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. He even wrote a book about it. And then after he wrote a book about it, then suddenly he decided he was having dinner one night, and then he just decided to leave the plate on, not fully eaten, and left for a trip in a canoe, and then was found drowned, dead. It was also William Colby. I'm just pointing out that the way Bob Marley died was through a pair of cowboy boots that was given to him by a film director. When he put them on, he shouted out. I've spoken to a guy that was there when it happened. He shouted out in pain, pulled off the boot again, and there was a copper wire inside the boot that punctured his big toe, and that is the toe where he later created the cancer that killed him. And the guy that gave him the boot was Peter Colby, the son of William Colby, the director of the CIA. Coincidence or not? What can you say?
Wow,
but
that's
anyway,
extraordinary.
They, as far as I know, they were coordinating this fake attack from a bunker that is just very close to the murder site, the crime site, but sixth floor below ground level, in what is now the 112 or 911 type of thing in Stockholm. But in those days, it was part of the Gladio network, underground tunnel network. And I believe that is where the whole murder was controlled from, the fake murder with Craig Williamson and these other people. Because also underneath Stockholm, on the level under the subway traffic level, there's about 618 kilometers of tunnels under Stockholm, going all the way north to Kungsängen and way down also, where I've spoken to military people that have been what they call city soldiers down there, and they say there are trucks and trains and all kinds of stuff that we have absolutely no knowing of. But many of the buildings, the government buildings, these ones are connected through tunnels underneath, including the Skandia building. Okay, so we got one hit team that has been sent up there, the fake hit team, but they think that it's a real hit. They're real professionals. They're soldiers of fortune, assassins under the control of Craig Williamson and with the help of Carl Gustav Östling, the Swedish James Bond, and then backed by the baseball gang. Are you with me so far?
I'm trying. I think I'm with you. Yes. Yeah. I think we are all following this very carefully here.
Yeah. So what happened was that during the time when this was being planned, and when this hit team started following Palme around in Stockholm, mapping his movements, because you need to know if there's a one-way street, if the hit team are trying to escape and it's a one-way street, or there's a train crossing and goes down like this, it could be a disaster. So they need to map the whole thing. That's standard procedure.
Yeah, and he is working with them. He's in on it.
Who?
Palme. Olof Palme.
Yeah.
He's in on all of that. He's part of orchestrating this fake murder that you've been describing so far.
Yeah, but they don't know about it. The hit team does not know about it. It's only Carl Gustav Östling, the James Bond one. He is the key person in this whole thing. So he is not aware of it. Oh, sorry. No one else is aware that this is a fake one, because it's extremely important that they believe that it was a real hit. Otherwise, you can have all kinds of problems with extortion, blackmailing, all kinds of things like that.
And they wouldn't be able to pass a lie detector test if it came to that. So everybody had to believe it was real. It was only Palme, and then the guy, what was his name, who knew that he was in on it.
It was Palme. It was Hans Holmér. the investigator, who was put there because he was from the inner circle, very important to control the outlet of the information. This is where these people move into key positions to control it, to stop all kinds of normal activity and so on. Also, all the witnesses don't listen to any of what they've said because they can identify who was behind it. So that team is on location in Denmark, in Sweden, in Stockholm. But during these 6 to 8 months before that happened, Palme started acting the exact opposite of what he was supposed to do. And nobody knew why. So there was a whole series of meetings in Wiltshire in England, where a guy called Erik Penser, who is very much involved in the Bofors weapon industry, he was the owner, had this country house, it said. It's almost like one of these mansions, you know, you've seen in James Bond movies where M is working with his agents and stuff like. And they had a series of meetings of very, very stressed, freaking out meetings where they're like, what the hell is going on with this guy? So in these meetings, and I managed to get hold of some of these documents. Here are a bit of a translation. It is people from Stay Behind, from Gladio, from NATO, from high up, you know, generals. You got business people, Bilderbergers, Kurt Nicolin. You got PG, many of them. Also the chief of the Swedish police, but also CIA and all kinds of people working also under. You know, they don't write out these names, and these are stamped and branded cosmic secret. I had an intelligence agent from MI6, a former agent there. I had him look at these ones. He almost fell off his chair when he saw cosmic secret, that stamp, because he said, this is unheard of. How on earth did you get these cosmic secret? That is, you can't get hold of these type of documents. And it was, I don't know, it was my friend Sven Anér who first came up with them. I have no idea where he got them from or whatever. But in it, it goes through super, super complex things with NATO, but where they say that we have a major problem on our hands. Olof Palme, they call it the SPM, Swedish Prime Minister. Something is really weird. He needs to be stopped, and they vote. You know, what are we going to do? They say, okay, it needs to be organized locally. We're going to import technicians from abroad. Technicians are assassins, and so on, because we need to stop this guy before he does something absolutely bizarre. And this operation went under the name of Operation Tree. You got very strong connections to George Bush Sr. also, which I'm going to come back here to. So they're freaking out on many, many different levels that we have absolutely no idea about, you know, nuclear power free this and atomic power stations here and military bases. And they're just saying him in the middle of all of this could mess all of it up. So also, Olof Palme had just got himself involved in the biggest weapon deal ever in Sweden with Rajiv Gandhi, who later died in a violent way, where he pulled
that was
through
the
that
successor after Indira Gandhi, right? The woman prime minister that got killed also around just before Palme, right? A few years before. And then he came into the position of power.
She got killed in 84, and 84, I think.
Or maybe 83.
84.
Yeah.
83. And then Rajiv Gandhi took over. I think it's very confusing with its Gandhi name because they're apparently not related.
Yeah,
but
they
anyway,
were not related, I think. But it's just so that people don't think it's her or the old Gandhi or somebody like that. That's actually been 3 Gandhis in the position of power as a prime minister in India, right? Am I correct? Or
yeah,
okay,
I did not. So So also, Palme was involved with Rajiv Gandhi to make a weapons deal, and also he said part of the deal was 235 kilos of weaponized uranium for atomic bombs. So, and Palme was involved in that also, I think, to get a massive load of cash in his pocket for his new life. So, anyway, so we had a lot of things going on, and George Bush in the background was getting really, George Bush Sr., who was a really, really bad boy. I tell you that when you look at international stuff, he's got his fingers involved in anything from JFK, the assassination, to onwards, all of these things. You got Bush in the background. So he was getting super annoyed with Olof Palme, also because Olof Palme or Bush close associate Oliver North he was sent to Sweden to get Palme to sign a end user certificate, which is a certificate that will show where the weapon is supposed to go, because according to international weapons rules, you're not these weapon factories are not allowed to sell guns to countries at war. So they sell them to neighboring countries that are not at war, and then they change the document so that they can be sent to the next, and then the next, and then the next, and then they end up in the war zone. Anyway, it was like a whole big thing that anyway, so Oliver North, the guy with very deeply involved in the so-called Iran-Contra scandal, where weapons were being sent out of the US or smuggled out, and then it was the thing that was returned as payment was raw cocaine. One of the pilots were Chip Tatum here with a beard, a friend of mine, who was the chief commander of George Bush's secret hit team, Pegasus. He was also the pilot for Richard Nixon and all the presidents up to George Bush Sr. But anyway, so I asked him about this whole thing. And would you mind telling us about what you know about the Olof Palme assassination, the Swedish Prime Minister? Can you hear it?
Yeah.
During the Iran-Contra years, if many of you even remember that, some of you probably weren't even born then, there was an issue at getting arms moved quietly because the United States couldn't supply offensive weapons or arms into the Nicaraguan Contras. In the early 80s, after we formed the Contra regime out of the old Somosan terrorists, the Congress voted on a thing called the Bolin Act, which said the United States government cannot actively work to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. So the only thing we could do was work in the humanitarian realm. And in that realm, we couldn't supply them with weapons. So what we needed to do, all of your military grade weapons have to have what's called an end user certificates. And those are supplied normally by other countries. Say Israel has, every country has end user certificates. They could say, these are our weapons, we were the end user, and we're authorizing those to be shipped to such and such country, or this group. North had gotten wind that Olof Palme, Sweden, because Bofors was out there and weapons were coming out of there, that we could get end user certificates signed by Sweden. When North took his trip over and asked for that to be done, he was turned down, and the word is Palme told him, not only no, but I'm going to turn you into the international courts for this, all of you. And he was very, very, very tough with it. And so that left, North was kind of a loose cannon in that. It left Bush with no choice other than to order the neutralization of Olof Palme. He couldn't allow those to go forward. And how we do those neutralizations, now the CIA doesn't walk in and do it usually. When we work against foreign governments like that, if it's a big person, if it's a political figure, we'll acquiesce. We'll hire in our guns to do that. We have assets. They're called wandering assets around the world, and those wandering assets would be hired and paid well to go in and take care of the.
Yeah. So this is straight from the inside. So what he said was that Oliver North went over to get end-user certificates for some Stinger missiles. Palme got really upset. He had been loyal before. He was giving them the finger saying, fuck off, and I'm going to nail all of you. Indirectly, he was saying Bush as well. Because, in these layers, North was Bush's man, so there was no coincidence there. And he said, I'm going to take you all into court. He was so brave also because he knew he's going to take off. He's going to be officially dead very shortly. So he did not want to get involved with anything. And he knew that they can't get to me because I'm going to die anyway very soon. And then just the picture here up to the left is Barry Seals. He was a pilot, very, very skilled pilot, and one of the pilots for Operation 40, the team that took out JFK. But he was also the guy in the Iran-Contra scandal that built up the whole thing around weapons and cocaine in and out. He's the guy that Tom Cruise plays in, I think it's called American Made. I think that's the movie. Came out a few years ago. That's Barry Seal. And Barry Seal was taken out just a few weeks before Olof Palme. And after Olof Palme, there was a whole series of different, like Uwe Bartschel, a West German politician that was also involved, was taken out. And so there was almost like this cleaning operation going on. But here anyway, so Chip absolutely confirmed that. He even said George Bush Sr. ordered it, the hit. We had to take care of Olof Palme. So the NATO sent in a team. In that team, there was a guy called Michael Vernon Townley, he was part of killing Robert Smith in South Africa, Pablo Neruda, the Nobel Prize winning poet from Chile, what's his name? Orlando Lettier in the US, where he and Ronnie Moffett, his associate, were blown up in a car that was the biggest national terror action before 9/11. It was a major thing. And also what I find interesting is that Michael Townley had the exact same CIA controller as Lee Harvey Oswald and James Files, the shooter behind the picket fence. His name, David Atlee Phillips, is the name of the controller. So we have the same small little group. And James Files, he was the guy that delivered the bomb that blew up Orlando Lettier. He was also, and another guy that was approached in Sweden to do the hit. His name is Ivan von Birchen. The guy that approached him, offering him $1 million, once again, $1 million here. His name was Felipe Vidal Santiago, or codename Charles Morgan. And well, here's me with Ivan. Felipe Vidal Santiago was in Dealey Plaza the day the shots were fired. He's the guy that steps out in front of the limo just before, almost to slow down the limo. At the time, also, he's standing right next to the umbrella man. His real name was Roy Hargraves. So these are people that were directly connected with the Dallas attack, as well as Olof Palme 23 years later. Another guy was Stefano Della Chiai. He was called the Prince of Terror. He was part of blowing up the train station in Bologna in Italy, but he was also educating hundreds of terrorists to do terror attacks. We're talking Gladio, but where the Gladio network is attacking populations of different countries, especially countries that are lefties, where they need to shake them up so that these countries will accept more and more control, more and more thing for their own security. There was also Roberto Tieme and a guy called Julio Izquierdo. This was, as far as I know, the hit team. Then we have the shooter on the other side that I'm going to come back to. I'm going to come to that. But anyway, so we come to the 28th of February, because what has happened is that the NATO team were given a green light. Go to Stockholm, take him out before he does anything stupid. And then they reported back saying, when we were trying to map Olof Palme's movement, we saw there's another team here. It's like unbelievable. There's another team doing exactly it. So they got the orders, just go stealth, follow them everywhere, be in the background. And then once it goes down, they even managed to infiltrate the other group. Once it goes down, we'll make sure to sabotage the whole operation so that it would be completely messed up for them, and nothing will never ever be able to track to us. But make sure that the job is finished. So go in, finish Palme, but also sabotage the other operations so that we will go clear. So like I say, we are now at the time of the assassination. It was sportlov, like I said. There was the whole city was empty. And then at the evening when Olof Palme was killed officially, at 6 o'clock in the evening, his tax files from the tax office were deleted because there was a very controversial thing going on where he was accused of tax evasion. He had been a speaker at the Harvard University, and instead of getting paid, his son was allowed in for free. And so that had become almost like a big thing and that it had exploded in Swedish press. But at 6 o'clock, these tax files, somebody went in there with a code, got in access to the computers and deleted that. I think that is part of Operation Fake, but creating the legend of Olof Palme. Nothing that could stain his name was allowed to stay there. Then at the same night also, there was a lot of helicopter activity around Stockholm and other cities where there was like circling around in the air. You had exactly that also at the JFK assassination with big military planes that was just circling around the nation, because you don't know in a case like that, uprisings, whatever. So these are there as controller of the public, At least that's the way I see it. All of these helicopters were observed. Then just earlier, just before the shooting, a factory building outside Stockholm was turned on fire. They said it was a pyromaniac, but that made all of the press photographers that should have been there maybe very quickly were out there taking photos of the fire instead. I don't think that is a coincidence either, because diversion is standard part of these operations. Look over here, look over there. Then also we had several death threats that was exposed right on the evening of the assassination, pointing in a specific direction. This is also part of the fake one. I told you about the stock market on Fridays before. But here comes the thing that has messed this up for 30, how many years? I normally call it like God has a sense of humor. When these operations go down, there's always something that goes wrong. Yeah, I've spoken to many black ops and so on, and I've asked them about their operations. They say it's not sometimes, it's always. There's always something that goes wrong. So this very day, when the whole thing was now we're in the fake operation here. The guy called Gustav Östling, the Swedish James Bond, that was the one that was supposed to change the ammo to blanks just a few hours before, because they had been training with the weapons and calibrated the sights, whatever. It was his job to make sure that the ammo was exchanged to blanks so that they could have a staged event, okay? So on that very day, suddenly he was taken in super sick to hospital, and they found out that he had a inflamed appendix and that he needed an urgent operation. So they operated him on the 28th of February. He wakes up and he's like, what time is it? What time is it? What time? And they said, whenever it was, 3 o'clock or whatever, 5 o'clock, I don't know the exact time. So he gets off, more or less, get off the operation table, more or less, and bleeding, even though he's stitched together, bleeding and in severe pain. he leaves the hospital against what the doctors are saying, because he is panicking. I need to get there in time to swap the ammo, because this is the day when this is going to go down. But apparently he doesn't make it. And this is where we come to what actually happened. So we have the fake team of the couple going down Sveavägen from the cinema, going towards the stay behind headquarters, what used to be that, where they know that the assassin is waiting around the corner. The assassin doesn't know that they know that they're in. But right outside the entrance, like 30 meters before the entrance into some 30, 40, 50 meters before the corner where the shooter's waiting, because there are alternative shooters, alternative escape cars. There's all kinds of vehicles circling this night. Some of them are there to make sure that there's no hero suddenly appears and start interfering, suddenly chase and jumps on the shooter or whatever. So all of these vehicles are placed around in strategic positions so that they could interfere and stop whatever. So the whole idea is for them to walk down, and then right outside the entrance into the Scandia house, there was a stand, a poster stand, a triangular poster stand. I'm going to see if I have it here, but anyway, with triangular, it's right outside the entrance, and there is where a switch should take place. So you have the double and a double wife, then you have the real Olof Palme and his wife coming, and right there they make a swap, and they're taken into the Scandia house, into the stay behind headquarters, where Olof Palme is supposed to be taken out on the back and then taken to Bromma flygplats, and where there's a special jet from Francois Mitterrand's glam fleet that is waiting for them. It's Ebbe Carlsson, the guy that died from AIDS. It's Carl Lidbom, the advisor. And then, according to the papers, unknown male, that's Olof Palme. We managed to find the records of this specific flight. And that is also where Lisbeth is in a police car. She's coming from that building in a police car to the hospital. The fake woman, the fake Lisbeth, is in the ambulance, not Lisbeth Palme. That's why she arrived in a police car. But so the whole idea is that a swap should be made there, and it's perfect with this triangular thing, because you can only see from one side at a time, so you can't see from both sides. And so they're exchanged, and then the fake couple continues and walks the last few 30 meters, and then boom, get shot. But the thing is that
and they were not supposed to be shot either. Obviously, the fake couple, they were just actors, and they were just going to pretend that they were going to be shot by the fake operatives, huh?
Exactly. There was this security exercise with a Swedish coup, with the scenario of the Swedish Prime Minister being shot, that was being prepared during the weeks before, where some of these key people from the baseball gang were in that whole thing. So I think that these doubles, whoever they were part of that. They had been informed it's just a security drill, or maybe they were told it's a film recording, it's a whatever. So nobody was supposed to die there. They were supposed to, boom, the hit team disappears in the dark, and these guys just shoveled into an ambulance. They control the people in the hospital. That was also a close relative to Lisbeth Palme, the doctor there. The Iron Gang, all of them were under discipline, under order. I wouldn't be surprised if these are military nurses, so that they can be ordered to silence or whatever. So the whole idea was, boom, fake assassination, and then they would find the patsy that I'm going to show you here shortly, and nail him. Maybe he would be suicided, and then the case would be closed before dawn. That was the plan. They had no idea about NATO. If you call them NATO team, the one with George Bush in the background, if we call them NATO, they had no idea that they were being followed and tracked and infiltrated. No idea whatsoever. So when
the NATO team, as you say, they had no idea that Palme and his wife was being swapped and went into the Scandia hotel or the Scandia place.
None of them knew. I mean, only a handful little people, just a handful little knew the bigger picture. It's essential that so few knew because it's a massive big secret. So it's always compartmentalized.
Then it's quite remarkable that they actually got the chance to swap them, as you say, and Palme was rescued there, and then that the fake actors went out there, and then he got shot.
It's like there's a special theory, they call it the meeting scenario, where there's this whole thing about, did Olof Palme stop and talk to the assassin? Because some people from the other side have seen that a group of three were speaking to each other. A group of people was like they were friends speaking to each other. There's also a delay because when Lisbeth's story was that they crossed Sveavägen to look in this fashion shop, and then they started walking. They met one guy on the way. His name is Nicola Fautzi, and Lisbeth claims that they continued walking and boom, the shots were fired. But when we checked with the guy that they met, we checked the distance from where he met them, and he just continued walking. The distance should be the same, more or less, from them if they continued walking both. Then they would have been up almost at Kungsgatan, way up there. So there were some minutes missing here, and that's one of my friends who got murdered would keep pushing around this whole meeting scenario. He died under weird circumstances, but so this meeting scenario, when people have seen that, they've seen the swap. One witness also say that Olof Palme walked on the outside of this triangular poster stand, and it's very odd to walk on the outside, but not if you're two. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's only, and there's only a handful of people that even saw a glimpse. Nobody knew Palme was there. Nobody, so before shots were fired, nobody knew that anything unusual was going to go down. But anyway, so when you look at the clothes, for instance, you have here his tie. You got like 1.6, that's a small bullet hole. You got 1.7, that's a big bullet hole. That seems like an exit hole. Can you see the fibers of it goes out, not in? That's the tie. It said they tried to explain that they said that little hole is a piece of bone from his spine that was shot out like that, and that it had nothing to do with also that the tie may have been folded. But I mean, really folded, shouldn't the holes be the same size at least? If it was folded, and how often do you fold a tie like that? I mean, it's not very wide. So what I'm telling you is that we also have his shirt. There are two holes like that. And I forgot what I was going to say. So what I believe happened here was that he was actually shot from two directions at the same time. We had, there was one in the first commissions, a politician, Jörn Svensson. He stepped out very early on and said, he was shot by a fine caliber bullet. That is not, he was shot from the front and then he was fired, okay? Because it didn't match up. There's another one when they're on the way to the hospital, they say victim shot twice in the chest. I mean, normally, in the chest, you would say in the back, but here they say in the chest, bröstkorgen. So what I truly believe happened was that when the shooter, the real, his name was Abdul Qasem, the guy that fired the shot into the back of the double, when he put his hand on the shoulder, there was a sniper on the other side from the NATO team, because they had infiltrated and they seemed to have had snipers in several different locations, that he fired when he saw that, and he got a green light because they had infiltrated the headquarters of this operation as well. Green light, green light. So when he put his hand on the shoulder and fired into the back, he fired a high-powered, fine caliber, high-speed rifle from the front. So suddenly you had a body with two holes, one from the front, one from the back. Because the whole thing was for them to make sure that Olof Palme was dead, and at the same time mess it up for team number one. I also think that it is from the NATO team, they're the ones stopping Gösta Söderström in the police car saying there's been a murder over there, or shooting, because he has been unidentified. They're there to get Gösta, who's unknown, into the whole thing and also to mess it up, which they managed to do.
This is an incredible story, an extremely complex double operation, and I mean, mind-blowing to even think that this could happen. How do we know? Let's say that all this is, of course, true. Then how do we know that it wasn't actually the real Olof Palme that was shot by both of them, and also that NATO team you talk about? Just briefly, I mean, you did talk about a lot of all of that in the past several hours, but just quickly, how do we know that it wasn't the real Olof Palme, and that he was transported to the airport and rushed away, flown off to some distant location?
I'm coming to that. We have the whole thing with the autopsy protocol, where one of the things is nobody recognized Olof Palme, who was very recognizable. You know, no one that saw him. Once they were at the coroner's office, the body disappeared. The body disappeared for 2 days. Why is that? Because it's not the right body. Why was the forensic pathologist not allowed to see the clothes? He wasn't allowed to examine Lisbeth Palme's claimed injuries. Why were the reason that Lisbeth Palme was not part of the reconstruction was because it was not her who had been there. So people, other witnesses, right away would have said, that was not her. And also the driver, Hans Holmér, the investigator's private driver and bodyguard, Hans Dahlgren, who, like I said, he said that he drove Olof Palme Hans Holmér around that night. He also said that later that night they picked up a woman and they drove her to a specific address, and she left a coat in the car. I would say the coat with the bullet holes in, not the ones there. Then we have, I went to a private meeting years later among these private investigators, and it was open for everyone. And among the audience, suddenly one guy stood up and went up on stage, and he was the guy that was the person playing Olof Palme in a movie called The Last Contract, about the assassination. It's a crap movie, but anyway. But he was somebody that looked so similar with Olof Palme that he was chosen to play this. He just went up on stage and he said, "I'm only saying this once. I don't gonna answer any questions. So please listen up. I was in a car," and I think he said with a woman, 5 meters from the crime site when the shots were fired. This vehicle I've never seen anywhere, and then he left, never to be seen or heard again. I have no idea what happened. But anyway, that is quite remarkable that a guy that much of a lookalike would be 5 meters from the site when the shots were fired. And here we have, when these operations go down, they always have like option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If something goes wrong, then it activates option 2. If that goes wrong, it activates option 3. So this also, I think, backs the whole thing about.
So there are many things that indicate that we are talking about a double, and that he was rescued or saved, the real Olof Palme, and there were witnesses, and they didn't recognize him, and everything you've just been describing.
What I know is that the person on the site was dead. Gösta Söderström pushed his finger against, he said, whoever that was, he was dead. Okay, so we know that individual got killed. He got murdered. Who he was, I have no idea. But I'm going to continue a little more. Because so the person they had planned to nail for this whole thing, that's a patsy, was what Hans Holmér in his own book, right, he called him the Mad Austrian. And he had prepared hours before the assassination. He said to his colleagues, well, there's been another death threat. It's this Mad Austrian again. And they said, well, should we do something? Should we call Olof Palme and warn him? And he said, no, don't worry about that. Anyway, the idea was that this individual was supposed to be picked up by a police car and then driven to wherever the real shooter had escaped, and then dropped off in that exact location so that they could point out and said he was the guy that came running this guy. He was called the Mad Austrian. But the Mad Austrian, do you know Josef Fritzl?
Absolutely wild. That terrible man who kept his daughter underneath his house imprisoned for like 28 years or something, that was revealed some years ago, and also that created quite some shock waves around the world because of Josef Fritzl. How was he possibly involved? If we can even get into that also here.
No, he was the one that they were planning as a patsy. He was the one that they were going to nail this on. I think he had been planned to be suicided on location, or if he would be taken to court or whatever, they would have this whole thing with his daughter, 28 years in the basement, as a perfect by the balls situation where I'm speculating. I'm just saying this is the guy that Hans Holmér pointed out. But he was supposed to be picked up at a place called Slussenplan, which is about a kilometer south of the site. A police car was going to pick him up and then drive him to where the shooter had been jumping into a car so that they could connect the two dots and then nail him for it. But when the police car came to pick him up, there was another police car standing there talking to him. So they were like, what the hell? I think that police car, there's several police cars that was not on duty this evening, that were, nobody knows who was using it, who was driving it. They're not registered as being used. I think that was part of the NATO team, part of sabotaging it, because they had infiltrated that whole thing. So they knew this is what's going to go down, and thus messed it up. So once again, the guy that alerted to Gösta Söderström, and this as well, all of it to mess it up, which they succeeded with brilliantly.
Yeah, but how is Josef Fritzl involved? You must tell that to the audience. I mean, everybody just knows him from being, called this monster when he was suddenly, discovered there in Austria. But he must have been involved on a different level, on an international scene, and this was many years before. Who was he? Why was he involved?
I think as far as I know, he was one of the things he was doing was making passports for Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency that is also working very, very close to CIA. I have no idea. I just know that the guy that Hans Holmér pointed out as having threatened Olof Palme the day before the assassination was Josef Fritzl. At that time, nobody knew about Josef Fritzl. I mean, it was years later that this whole scandal broke after I think the daughter managed to escape. So nobody knew. And I'm just speculating, why did they choose him? For one thing, I mean, he looks the deal. He looks bizarre. He looks violent. It's very convincing. If you say he was the shooter, people would believe it, because of once again, the facial. And maybe they have.
But then there must be something more to that Josef Fritzl case with his daughter in the basement and all of that. I mean, that must be way more actually, that we don't know about that whole case, if he was even involved way back then, and perhaps they even wanted to frame him back then. I mean, he must be a bigger player than we think.
No, I just think he was the perfect patsy. I don't think he was involved at all. He was told, you go, you stay on this corner, maybe as part of this security drill, whatever. You know, he was being lured into an ambush where he was going to take the fall without knowing it. That's the standard with patsies. But he needs to look the role. He needs to look
But then he
dangerous.
certainly wasn't just some deranged and sick father living in some little town village in Austria that nobody has ever heard of until all of this came out. I mean, he was a big player, bigger player than we think. You said he was doing passports for the Mossad.
When you get into this world of intelligence agencies, these Mossad, BOSS, CIA, whatever, they're not connected on a street level, but the higher up you get in the power pyramid, they're more and more connected. You know, so he was delivering or manufacturing passport to Mossad, that is what I've heard, which would indirectly connect him to the CIA, which would indirectly connect him to possibly several of the other ones. I don't know why he was picked, except that he had his daughter locked in the basement for many years, and if they knew about it, that would be the perfect blackmail thing, maybe to keep quiet. But I don't think he was supposed to survive that night. And during the morning hours of the 1st of March, the day after, there was one guy that called in Morten Palme, the son at the, or this was, I think it was the same night, called in him for an interrogation. Maybe it was the next day. And he was trying to say that this is the guy to Morten Palme. And Morten Palme said, no, absolutely not. And he said, yeah, but maybe he was like, and he was trying to make faces to make Morten think that, to get him to point this guy out. And Morten said, no, it's not him. So I think that the fake assassination, it was only, on the way to the hospital, that's when they found out that the guy that was not supposed to be dead had 2 bullet holes in him. I mean, that is major. And it's one thing if it's only 1 bullet hole, that's your operation. Where the hell did the other shot come from? This was super secret, Can you imagine the nightmarish freak out mode? It's like somebody somewhere knew about this whole thing enough to shoot a shot at the same time. From where? Who? No, I mean, and
that almost seems like too much of a coincidence if that actually is real.
I don't understand coincidence here.
Yeah, it seems like too much of a coincidence.
If you have, the thing is, why the whole delay? Why the cover-up? Why all of these things? I think the fake assassination was planned just to go very smooth. Just a handful of people knew about it. It would be solved by dawn. This guy would be suicided or taken away, put away. And thank you so much. Oh my God, the legend Olof Palme was created with pre-printed all kinds of posters with a black band. All of that was prepared beforehand. And the whole legend was created. All of it, the case, Swedish police, so efficient. Boom, my God, they got him after just a few hours. It's amazing. And case closed. Thank you. Go back to sleep. That was the case. It's the second shot that messes everything up. That's why the delay in the ambulance as well, where it's like on the way to the hospital, they're like freaking out, like, how the hell is this? And also when the body of Palme arrives to the hospital, or the body of the double, he's been cut open, like there's an 11 centimeter long cut on the side of his chest that has been stitched together very roughly. It's said in the protocol. What the hell is that? If not, maybe get the bullet out, whatever evidence that it, get it out. I don't know, but that explains the delay in when they arrived. It's absolute mayhem. I feel really sorry for these people, you know, and that has been the whole start of 30 odd years of absolute nightmare cover up, trying to cover their tracks, divert attention, find patsies. So this was not planned at all, not at all. This is also why Hans Holmér and Tommy Lindström, who was part of this operation, only arrived at 11 a.m. They were there the whole night, just pulling their hair, trying to figure out who the hell did this.
This was a double attack, and yeah, wow. This is really that's why it's so complex and so very well difficult to actually get into, and you have to really talk about it for a long time in order to connect all of these dots, because it's not, I mean, it's even wilder than a movie script. This is quite extreme and also very complicated. And I understand that sentence that guy said, if people actually knew about this would change the whole foundation of Sweden and also the world, I guess. So just, I mean, I don't know if we probably should wrap up soon, because we've been going for 4 hours now. In conclusion, can you talk about what you feel happened to Olof Palme after this, the real guy that escaped?
The real guy, I believe, was alive until just a year ago.
Just a year ago. Just a year ago. He just died, you think?
Yeah, as far as I know, he was 94 when he died. And I'm writing a book right now called Guilty Victim, where I write the story the way I see it. I try to be as close to the real truth as possible. And it's called Guilty Victim because he was the victim, but he was guilty also, you know. So it's like I'm writing it also as a Dan Brown novel with short chapters, because there's so much information to keep track of. So it's like where I hope I can show in an easy, understandable way all of these different aspects of these things that went down. So I believe that he absolutely survived. Who died, I don't know. If there's a body in the grave, I highly doubt that. And if so, it's not Olof Palme. I can guarantee you that.
And where do you think Olof Palme, the real one, who you say died last year at 94, where do you think he was located? What was he for all of those years? And he was never discovered and seen by anybody. But where do you think he was?
I think that he was flown down in this Glamjet from Francois Mitterrand. He was flown down there. We haven't even got into this whole thing, but he was flown down to the south of Europe, near Chamonix in France, and there he was kept under the radar for quite a while. He's then been seen in different places. He's been seen in Greece. People that knew him so they said that it was only like about 10 years ago. So he was, maybe this is early on. I must check that, but way after he was dead. I also have 5 observations of him in Russia and close to his family ties. And then we can talk about it another time, but I really think that he died quite recently, and I can describe that in another interview.
Wow, I mean, this is really extraordinary and mind-blowing. And if everybody has been following us here for the last 4 hours, there is a lot of information to consume and to understand, and a lot of dots to put together here. And you've certainly done a wonderful and amazing job. It's been really fascinating, also mind-blowing. There's a lot to really hold on to here and to remember. And it's a very complicated case. And we'll also do an interview with Claes Hedberg about this, another Swedish, well, you're not really Swedish, you're from Denmark, but you've been living in Sweden. But this gentleman is coming from Sweden. He's also done an extensive research, so it's going to be fascinating talking to him. but you were probably the first one, and you have written this two-part book there, and people can read all about it, and they can buy it, I guess, through your website, lightonconspiracies.com.
Yes, of course. All my other books are there, as well as my sweetheart Kim's books. Also, if you feel that this type of information is of value, please, I've been doing this for free for decades. So if anybody would like to support me through donations or sign up as a member, especially we have VIP membership that gives you access to everything on the website. There's almost 9,000 articles. There's
can we get you full screen now, just so that we end on you here?
Boom.
Yes. So people can go to your website, lightonconspiracies.com. They can donate to you and support your work there. They can get your books. There are many, certainly the coup d'etat books there, the two-part books on the Olof Palme assassination, and many other books that you've written as well, huh?
Yeah. And it's like, sometimes I get a little annoyed because people, I say something and they go in on the internet and just click, 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 and they say, no, it has been proven not to be right by fact checkers. I'm like, who really, really? Okay, these fact checkers, please put some 30 odd years into it and let's talk again. And these fact checkers very often are set there just to censor and stop this type of information. So it's anything else than getting well, he's doing it for the money. What money? Well, he's doing it for fame and fortune, really, and harassment and threats and whatever. So it would be amazing as I think, an exchange of energy if people would like to back me, because I've been paid by no one for all of these years, and I have a family to feed. So that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we all do this work for free and for information, and to do a good deed in the world, So this is certainly what you've been doing, and we have been doing. So we know all about that. Certainly, you don't choose this as a great career opportunity, huh?
Nope, not a clever one. That's for sure.
That's for sure. I mean, it's always fascinating and always wonderful to have you on the show. We always love it every time. You're so thorough and you go really, really in depth. It's very fascinating, and that's a lot of information to process here. And it's great. And I'm looking forward to the next one, Ole, as always. It's always a joy to have you on. Thank you so much for being on Age of Truth GB once again.
Thank you, Lucas. I just want to say with Claes Hedberg's book, he has also really made a very powerful statement that this is a theater murder. And he's made a way, he's just pushed through these doors that have been closed forever and make it sort of like available to mainstream any one person, more or less, that to open up the mind of a theater murder. Because for me, I tried for years and years, not easy, but he has done an incredible job with that. We have completely different, that the theater murder was there. He, as far as I know, has not the whole NATO part and the double play and all of these things. But on the whole, we come from, the basic is, it was not a real assassination, and the way we have been told.
Yeah, it's going to be so fascinating also to talk to Claes Hedberg here. We're going to do a face-to-face conversation, which we would have done if you had not been on Bali. And I hope you'll be back in your home country sometime soon, and then we can meet once again. But it's going to be fascinating to hear his side of the story. And I do think that you agree on so many points there and all of the research that you have done. And he certainly has done a great thing to push this whole thing forward and make it more public. But your research, Ole, has been so valuable to so many people, and it's absolutely amazing. So thank you for that, and thank you once again for being on here to share all of that for so long here for the last 4 hours with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Once again, thank you so much to Ole Dammegård for this amazing and thorough presentation for 4 hours here on the channel, and I hope that you've all been with us and have enjoyed this presentation. But first of all and most of all, thank you very much to Ole Dammegård, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. Please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is very needed and greatly appreciated. On behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.